actually getting audio throughput like Wage Rage Radio 2. Just had no audio output. So we'll do some audio testing to make sure that this one.
I'll just try to be your second hand
Yeah.
or second arm, just of helping people get on stage if they got anything.
Yeah. Just pull people up on stage one at a time. Okay,
Yeah.
looks like audio's working. Okay, cool. Cool.
Yeah, no more of that.
Perfect. What's up, Eagle Cash? Welcome to the chat. Are you ready for the daily wage? It begins tomorrow. We're all kind of stuck in the same boat when it comes to that. Who's ready to get the week started? Yeah, Toast, you can go up the stage if you want. I'll go ahead and shoot you an invite if you want. What's up, everybody in the chat? What's up, Benelli? I saw you in the comment section on the last video. I hope you guys enjoyed. There's a couple of people that came in. They're going to cry. It's like, the thing is most of the stuff that I talked about in the last video is not really to glaze China. It's just to point out that, like, the United States is just, by and large, falling behind. And that's something I just genuinely don't like. And so, I would like to see some of the technologies, brought here. Not me, lol. Nice to see you too, man. Okay, cool. I was thinking about watching your stream for the first time, and bang, you were live. Yeah, dude, I haven't streamed for like 2 weeks, because I'm gonna be honest with you. It's like, it's like when you're busy and you got a full-time job, it's like, you got like a narrow weekend to actually go out and like turn on your live stream, stuff like that. I suppose live streaming is easier, but I've never been considered myself one of those people that likes to live stream. I'm just a guy who gives his 2 cents on the internet, and I just kind of let people agree with it or disagree with it. So it's like one of those things that it's not something that's like always tickled my fancy, if you want to call it that. It's like, there's a lot of people out there that love to be content creators. I'm just one of those people that just likes to talk about substantive ideas more than anything. Everything you said makes sense. Logical sense and no crying here. No, yeah, no, I've seen you. You've been in my comment section for a while, Benelli. I've seen you around, but it's like one guy was like saying, this is just glazing China. It's like, I'm not trying to do that. Like, I wouldn't have to glaze China if we did half the things that I talked about, like high-speed rails. If we had a high-speed rail between every major metroplex within the United States, there would be no need for me to glaze China, okay? There'd be no need for me to do any of that stuff, is because we'd already have what we wanted. Like, if this was the 1960s and we landed on the moon, I would have no reason to glaze the Soviet Union, is because we already got the majority of things that we want, right? So that's kind of the funny part, is because for me, it's not really about ideology. I just want to have a decent standard of living and just be left alone to live my life. And that's kind of the funny part, is like, that's the vast majority of the people who follow this channel anyways. So, I'm
gonna glaze China.
Yeah, glaze China, bro. We're all China boos,
Man, silk robes, dudes with long hair, jade jewelry,
Mandate of heaven style talking points, So
look. Say what you will, but they had drip.
Yeah, they did. They really had that aristocratic drip. If you look at some of their outfits and attires, throughout history, it's like they did have drip, and you kind of have to give them credit for that. Europeans used to have that, but they just kind of got rid of that through the Industrial Revolution, which is kind of tragic. Ray, you're a mod of the server. You can come onto the stage if you want. Okay, cool. You already came on. I was like, look at the live stream. What's up, dude?
I was just gonna say, I think we're at the point right now where there are so many people looking at China just because, even with all of its faults, it's take care of its citizens. It actually cracks down on crime. And how many people honestly go to the I almost got mugged on my way to last night when I was filling up gas. And what if I was in China? Would that happen? No, probably not.
Not as often. See, the funny part is I still consider myself largely an individualist. I don't care about Eastern collectivism. It's never been my shtick. But the fact is that we are to such a degree of hyper individualism, to such a degree, it's like you can't even get anything done, society wide, to actually make society better. Propose a high-speed rail in the United States. That's unthinkable. That's never going to get done. Propose an alternative work schedule. Just abolish swing schedules for all employers and force managers to plan, organizing the work schedule more effectively, which would probably make everybody's lives better. That's just an administrative policy. No, we could not do that. Anything that you want to do to change here is met with bureaucratic, upheaval. And that's kind of the funny part, what I talked about in the last video, is that, notice how fast these data centers are being propped up as soon as the billionaire class wants something. As soon as the billionaires want something, then it all of a sudden gets done. But if it's anything else, it's just infinite bureaucracy that's just going to basically hinder and frustrate you out of existence. That's what I hate the most, is because, they could take their political will to making American civilization better. They just don't. They just literally just do what they can to make themselves, enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. That's what I don't like. It's the double standard.
I'm, 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 I'm I was about to say, I'm just waiting with all the data centers popping up. Do you guys see how much they are bribing the local councilors? They're going around they're going around this industry.
Yeah.
They have found a way into it to just bribe the community, to bribe the actual politicians, the local ones that you and me, we can actually affect change. They are going right for it, so people have to be on the watch out. Like currently in my state right now,
Yeah.
there are multiple lawsuits against the government and against different companies because they came in and then they like got around, they bet money into the local council, got the local council, and then the citizenry snapped and it removed them, and it's just turned into a large legal battle.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing. It's like, you know, how much they just like literally frustrate, like, you know, they frustrate any other kind of change that actually makes things more efficient. But then when it comes to like what they immediately want, it doesn't matter if it's done efficiently. It's like the data center thing. I've said a couple of times, I don't have a problem with data centers. I don't even have a problem with AI, but they're doing it in the most antagonistic way to piss literally everybody off at the same time. It's like, you know, it's like they're sucking up electricity, which they're not even putting on nuclear fission power plants to make electricity cheaper. They're just literally passing the cost and probably shaking hands with the power companies to engage in more rent seeking. You know, when it comes to the water usage, why are you using tap water that people drink and use for other things to cool these data centers? You could have a closed loop system. I can go through the thermodynamic math and talk about how you can actually, you know, create a system to actually offload that heat. It's not any new science. This is old science. It's been known for a long time. But they don't do that. They just pass the cost in the sloppiest way and then get surprised Pikachu face that everybody hates them. It's genuinely impressive how stupid these people are.
How spicy is this conversation allowed to get?
Keep it within TOS, you know. I get it, like, everybody's, you know, pretty spicy about it. I've seen some spicy takes about those data centers. I'm not gonna lie, it's actually kind of hilarious watching the spicy takes on the internet. Obviously, I can't say for the obvious reason. But most people don't like these data centers for the obvious reason. It's like, again, what tangible benefit is this producing for American civilization? Before they start accusing us all of being Chinese spies, for even contending with them, is because we're going to lose the AI race if we don't, like, glaze them. Cheap and long-term method, lazy and short-term games. Yeah. What's up, man?
Well, the whole thing is, like, even with all this stuff with AI, the majority, at least what I've seen, at least in my company to work for, is the majority of people aren't even using AI in a useful way.
No, you can't.
It's not providing any real tangible benefit besides acting as a more advanced Excel spreadsheet for math.
You know, I don't know if you're familiar with graphics programming, right? Is because, you know, you ever realize that, like, games, like, you know, modern games with all this graphics, like, sugar and stuff like that, they're just unplayable is because of the motion blur. And, like, I hate motion blur with games. I always try, that's the first thing I turn off, right? Is because you got to think about it from the perspective of the investor class, okay? You know, they look at it for about 3 seconds, and they say, this looks pretty, so this must be a fun and enjoyable game to play, even though, like, motion blur is one of those things that's just obnoxious. I can't stand motion blur. It just declines the quality of the game, is because you can't even keep track of what's going on, right? You know, investors look at AI as a chatbot, putting out information, being like, you know, they look at it for 3 seconds, be like, this is the future. They don't actually get into the details of how to actually use these technologies. They just jump on a bandwagon, and most of the time that's fueling, like, the investor hype for AI is just literally, like, FOMO. It's fear of missing out. It's like everybody else is using it, so if I don't use it, I'm not going to become competitive, right? You know, nobody has really demonstrated beyond maybe a handful of cases where, you know, it's been more of a skill multiplier and a tool than it has been a replacement. But they're talking about agentic AI, like, all over the place. Like, that's their favorite thing. Now, the funny thing is that China doesn't even participate to that race. They only believe the US is into it. Well, that's kind of the funny part. The Chinese don't care, is because the fact is they see, like, AI is just like another tool, which it is. That's all it is. It's like, I was talking with a couple of buddies, is that, like, you know, if you have a well-crafted prompt, you can get what you want out of it, but it has to be descriptive enough where you have no ambiguity to describe the output. I almost described it as, like, compilation, right? And I've talked about it a couple of times before. It's like, you know, when you are a language, a programming language is just a language to express ideas, right? You know, some kind of logical structure. That's something that exists independent of whatever language you decide to express it in, right? Whether it be like Python or C++, right? If you have the core essence of the logic that you want to implement, you know, and you know exactly what you want to do, you know, the details of translating it to a particular language, something like C++ is fairly trivial. It doesn't take much effort to actually do that. But the thing is that still requires a significant amount of technical background to know what you're doing in the first place, which is why vibe coding has always been one of these really stupid things to me. I spent the past 2 years binge watching your videos, and I love your passion ideas. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for the follow, and I appreciate your company in the stream, too. I teach AI, like how to use generative BS stuff, and it has uses, but it's not going to replace everything. Lost my amazing teach job to an AI. Yeah, basically, I get that. No, real. Like, the thing is, there's one thing I've used AI at work with, and that's to generate images for PowerPoints. Like, that's the extent of where I found, like, AI to be actually useful, and it's just kind of illustrate ideas. You know, and sometimes if it's, like, diagrams, complex diagrams that require detail. What's up, Sizer Karki? Welcome to the stream. Is that, like, you know, it's not very good at filling out those details. I know ChatGPT did an update where it, you know, rendered fonts a little bit better, but it's something that's, like, you know, you'd rather just spend some time in, like, Draw.io to, like, describe what you're trying to do, as opposed to just kind of leaving an AI to do it, is because, you know, you have to be fairly descriptive with the AI to get it to do what you want it to do. Otherwise, the ambiguity of what you're describing, it's going to make up its own thing. That's why vibe coding I've always found to be incredibly stupid. And, you know, it's insane that, like, you know, because I've been seeing that a couple of things. I think there's a company called Artisan. What's up, man? Welcome to the stream. Is that, like, you know, they're trying to create, like, entire agentic AI workforces where they have, like, 8 AI agents, like, talking to one another. It's actually kind of stupid. It's like, you know, you have, like, one human manager that's managing in, like, a team of, like, 20 agentic AIs. What's up, Miss K? Welcome to the stream. But the thing is, it's like, you know, it's all about, like, control and, like, you know, getting them to do this kind of performative work. We've all been, if you've ever worked a white-collar job, and you probably already know that, like, most of these jobs, like 80% of the time, you're really kind of doing nothing. You know, and it's like, you know, it's the same thing with these, like, these chatbots. Unless you have a well-defined goal, you know, you're really just wasting everybody's time and not really doing anything, including, like, the AI tokens or the tokens that you use to actually, you know, buy compute power with AI, which is also getting more expensive because of the demand going up, right? What are your opinions on AI-generated art? As an animator, I'm very against, and I feel that it's something that can only harm artists. I don't even think it can harm artists, is because there's a lot of things that AI art is just not good at. It's like, you know, the thing is here's another thing. I realize this is because, like, when it comes to AI generation of art, it's like, you want to know why it all looks like same-ish slop? Is because the average normie doesn't know the different details on how to actually draw art. They don't know how to do things. Art is far more technical than people give it credit for. And if you don't know how to describe what you're trying to get the robot to generate, you know, you're just going to converge to the same-ish slop that, you know, you see all over the place. Maybe like Studio Ghibli kind of slop, right? So I don't really, like, oppose, like, AI art from a moral perspective. It's just the fact is that, once again, like, people underestimate, like, how technical AI is. And so, you know, the reason it looks all samey is because the fact is people don't know how to express properly to the robot or the AI how to get, like, the style, format, or even, like, you know, drawing style that they want to get. And so it's like, that's why I don't really see it as something that's going to replace, like, okay, so here, to be fair, there is a section of the economy where, you know, so for advertising, I have a buddy who's an artist, and he's been laid off because, you know, there was a huge market for hiring an artist for marketing. And, you know, the thing is that, like, you know, that's been taken over by AIs because, you know, when it comes to drawing, like, you know, art for, you know, marketing ads and ad campaigns, it's like most companies are just going to use an AI to generate it on the fly to generate an ad more than anything, which that was a huge amount of artist jobs that I didn't realize till after the fact. It's kind of like web devs for software engineering. A lot of web dev roles, you know, ended up getting automated away by AIs because it was very easy to, you know, write GUI code with AI. You know, it's not... The thing about, like, I've noticed with GUI code is that it's something that you can get an AI to generate for you fairly easily, but anything more complex that has, like, you know, more, you know, I guess, depth to it is much harder to actually get AI to do. It's like, you know, if you try to get it to do something incredibly technical that you don't understand yourself, you're going to find yourself studying it and trying to figure out and then describing specifically to the AI what you wanted to do in the first place. I showed my cousin how to tell an AI image from real image today, and he was playing Fortnite, which was, it was using it as their backgrounds, and you could clearly tell which one was AI generated. A lot of the times you can, you know, it's not, you can tell the differences, you know, there's different, like, errors and, you know, things that are wrong with it for it to work out. AI agents read the entire stack trace every time they try to compile code. That's a huge amount of tokens used. Yeah, dude, not 100%. It's not actually very efficient. It's like, you know, AI, like, I've used AI to kind of, like, you know, if I don't want to write, like, a section of code or something like that, and I want it to, you know, I already know how to write it myself, I'll get the AI to write it, is because there won't be any room for human error, and then all I have to do is debug it. But that's the extent of using AI, in my honest opinion. Same with
Do you
AI
mind
writing.
if I ask you a question about AI, actually?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Do you have, what's your opinions on, like, how China and a lot of Asian countries are dealing with AI? Because from what I've observed, they're a lot more positive about it than we are in the West.
Yes.
Like, it's just overall, I think that in terms of AI usage, they're doing it probably a bit smarter than us, and they have a much better culture around it than our tech bros, however they're doing it.
Well, yeah, like I said in all my videos thus far, it's like the Chinese are looking at AI as something that's going to make things cheaper and more efficient. In the United States, it's like, how can we antagonize workers into making them work harder for less pay and then make their lives absolutely miserable? And then they wonder why there's a stronger backlash against AI in the Anglosphere or the United States than other countries across the world. It's not hard to figure out, like, you know, which one has a positive... Like, I mean, there's literally articles from, you know, millionaires and billionaires talking about if you don't know how to use AI, you're going to be a part of the permanent underclass or some other stupid shit like that. It's like, of course people are going to get pissed off at that. What a shocker.
That's all true, but, I mean, also there's Japan and the Philippines, which they also seem to be a lot more positive about AI than a lot of Western countries, which, in terms of economics, they're kind of at more risk because it threatens a lot of office workers' jobs, or I guess maybe not because Japanese have some weird culture stuff there, but I don't know.
I think it's because the fact is, and this isn't anything new, you can go back to the Industrial Revolution when the steam engine was first getting invented. It's like, you know, they were using the steam engine to antagonize mill workers and textile workers, and people, you know, if you ever heard of the group the Luddites that would burn down factories because they didn't like the steam engine, this is no different. You know, this is not to say, like, Luddism is not necessarily anti-technology, it's just the fact is people's material interests are being affected by a technology that is displacing their work, right? This isn't necessarily new. It's something that's happened before in history. It's just expressing itself in a different form. The only thing that I will say that is kind of fucked up is because I remember when artists were saying, like, a little while ago, is that, you know, when it comes to AI, like, AI should be doing the jobs that nobody wants to do, like the, you know, the dirty jobs or whatever, right? You know, we should all be doing art instead of, like, that. And it's like, I always kind of laughed at that one, but then Fox News just kind of ran with it. It was like, oh, these elitist white-collar workers think they're above doing manual labor. And it's like, I think you missed the point. Like, nobody wants to, like, have their body get destroyed by 40. Like, you know, it's like, you know, these people I didn't agree with in the first place, you know, but then Fox News just kind of ran with it, and a lot of right-wingers are like, well, you know, blue-collar work is the way to go, even though it's like, you know, they never like to talk about how that destroys your body over time. It's like, they just kind of ran with what people criticize AI for and then doubled down on it. It was incredibly stupid. But yeah.
I mean...
I think that the
states will actively poison you and find ways to, like, get OSHA to look at it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is elites and, like, rich morons. They tend to like to deflect to they deflect to everything. For instance, when I was just getting out of college and doing job search, and everyone was talking, oh, you should have went to a trade school, you should have done this, you should have done that.
Yeah, they pulled the rug on you.
Yeah, but then when I eventually did get a job and started doing that, and the trade started, like, a lot of things went bad with the trades, with people importing 1 billion Indians or under hiring. Yeah. When that happened, it was, oh, you should have went to college, you should have gotten a degree in STEM, or you should have worked for HR. Point is, I think that they will just deflect towards anything that can get the immediate problem off of, we are making things worse overall. They can just, if
it's
they
so
can just
stupid,
shift
man.
that. Yeah,
like, it's like,
if they can
Larry
just
Finger's
shift
like,
it,
I'm worried
they'll do
about it, like drones attacking these AI data centers and stuff like that. But you know, you're anti-American if you don't support like the bourgeois class. It's amazing these fucking people will do this shit. It's like, you know, it's like you're anti-American unless you glaze like Larry Fink and his stupid enterprise, okay? But then they'll hire an infinite amount of Indians to replace the American worker. You know, it's patriotism when you support their interests, but it's not patriotism when they hire a bunch of foreign labor to undercut the American working class, right? I've always hated that stuff. But the funny part is
the Dow
that, like,
is over 50,000.
Yeah, the funny part about it is that, like, you know, they would have significantly less pushback and problems with people just getting irritated at these AI data centers if they just, so like, it's like, I've said this plenty of times, one of the reasons why I stopped being a right-wing libertarian is because the fact is you can't actually get the billionaire class to actually respect the rules of capitalism. They can't just leave people alone. They've got to stick their tendrils in everything and screw everything up. Like, I've never had a problem. I've never been one of those moral leftists. It's like they have a moral obligation to care for me or whatever, right? I'm more of an individualist, right? But that's not what they do. They don't fuck off to their mansions and leave everybody else alone. They find ways to, like, organize all of society to benefit themselves. And the Epstein class is a perfect example of that. It's right. You know, if they had built their data centers independently and they didn't drive up, like, electricity prices and they didn't use water to basically make everybody's lives worse, nobody would care. Nobody would give a shit. You know, but they've actively gone out of their way to fuck with people, and they're surprised that people are, like, backlashing against them. So, consequences of my actions. Oh no.
It reminds me
I'm a little
of
bit curious. When it comes to sort of industrial civilization we currently have, pretty sure everyone here is aware that it relies on energy. Right now, that energy is mostly fossil fuels. Now, I don't understand how they expect to really have this thing, sustain itself in the long term, unless they decide to train a bunch of people to be nuclear engineers and build a bunch of nuclear power plants, which even then it would be a little bit of a challenge because not every industrial process can be electrified. So I know you're an
Yes,
engineer, so what do you have to say about that?
So here's kind of the thing, like, if you want to know my true opinion on, like, the power thing, and you can go look at my Reindustrialization of America video or article that I wrote, like, a little while ago, right? I would electrify as many things as possible, and then I'd also make the base of the energy grid just be nuclear fission power. That would be my take. Now, not everything can actually be done that way. Like, I mean, battery tech is getting better to some degree, but the thing is, not everything can be turned into electrified. So I obviously, and also on top of that, when it comes to the manufacturing of, like, different petroleums, plastics, and stuff like that, you do need oils for that. So obviously, it's not going to go away, entirely, right? But a lot of these things can be made easier by just, setting up the electrical infrastructure and then also pivoting to nuclear fission power. That's my take on that one. And like half of these problems that we're having. So the thing is that, like, what I don't understand about the rent-seeking class is that they could have their data centers, they could have their little, AI, farms. Because if they actually wanted to be competitive with China, why don't they actually intelligently create the infrastructure to facilitate it? But they don't. They don't invest in nuclear fission power, even though it would only take 500 nuclear fission power plants to power the entire United States. They would never actually garner that political. Or the fact is, use, like, the technology. Like, there's many ways you can cool these data centers. But they don't actually use any of the working technologies to do that. I don't know, maybe they offshored all their engineers, which they probably did, but oh well, is what it is. But yeah,
well, I doubt that many nuclear engineers are actually trained.
So nuclear engineering is a very small field, to be honest. Nuclear engineering is like one of those things that's like, you're really stuck at where there are like nuclear fission power plants in existence, and I think there's only 97 in existence right now, and it produces about 20% of the grid's energy. And so the thing is, like, most people don't go into nuclear engineering. If they do, they usually do something besides working at a power plant, maybe working as a radiologist or whatever, right? So, the thing is that, like, yeah, there's not a lot of nuclear engineers is because there's not a lot of nuclear engineer roles either, so...
Yeah, and I don't doubt if they had the political will to actually build these things, that there's something could be done, but, like, right now, the United States uses an insane amount of energy per capita compared to most countries in the world. And furthermore, I just don't know how they expect to keep the system running without the political will to also electrify and build these nuclear power plants.
The funny part is, if I were to end up like dictator tomorrow, right, the first thing I would do with like the political will, like, because Donald Trump got elected in 2025 with like a ton of political will, right? The first thing I would automatically do is make electricity cheap by just propping up as many nuclear fission power plants as possible, right? And that would basically bring down the cost of pretty much everything else because everything runs on energy. Now, of course, we're going to have gasoline for a little while, but I'd make a huge transition to electrification where I possibly could, right? Things that would tangibly make people's lives better.
I would say that the big reason why they didn't develop American energy was because they were betting on two things for their energy. One was building a lot of these data centers in the Gulf states. That doesn't need explanation for why that didn't work. The other was Venezuela. That's why Trump took over Venezuela and did that whole stupid coup thing, except the old government is still in power there, and their infrastructure for making fuel oil is massively degraded, and our gas companies have basically said, yeah, we're not going to improve the infrastructure there.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, the lifting costs in Venezuela are just so ridiculously high, and the only advantage that Venezuelan oil has is just that the refineries in the United States are built to process it. It's absolute. I don't know if I can say the R word on the stream, if it'll get demonetized or whatever.
I'm not even monetizing in the first place. I didn't actually go through it. Speaking of monetization, if anybody is interested in donating the channel, I did create a Buy Me a Coffee. It's in the link tree if anybody's interested. I don't really like advertisements on my videos because a lot of people do appreciate the fact that there aren't any advertisements on my videos. So if you want to support the channel or whatnot, just, donate and, buy me a coffee or whatever, right? I'm probably not going to put ads on the channels because it's just, usually not worth it. And people do enjoy these videos without having advertisements on them. So with that being said, yeah, go ahead. Wage rage. Another day before the daily wage for the week.
Hey,
You have to be
so
engaged before the
first things first, you know, happy. There's my alarm.
Happy late Sunday.
Happy, yeah. Happy. You know, I wish everyone a very, you know, fulfilling and hopefully very quick, you know, wage week. Very cool. Very. I hope we can all become rent maxers eventually. We can all become like landlord. We can all landlord max. That's the dream. We're
One
gonna,
can wish.
you know,
See, that's kind of thing. Like, this is the thing. It's like everyone, like, that's the funny part being a business owner or a landlord. Like, not everybody can be a landlord because that would, you know, imply that some people are not tenants, right? Somebody has to be a tenant for somebody to be a landlord. And so it's just better. Like, the best thing the United States can do is make the cost of living much more affordable, pop the property bubble, you know, make electricity cheap, make production cheap. And that's the only way to actually become competitive to China. That's the only solution. But yeah, do you have a link to this description of this video? Yeah, I don't have the link tree's in the description of the video. Yeah, it is. So yeah.
Hey, before we get too far away from it, though, I do want to comment on the whole, like, you know, energy grid thing. Now, I don't know what the fuck the nuclear power plants are doing, but I have been summoned back when I ran my welding business a couple of years ago. I had been summoned to multiple, like fucking, we're talking massive, like 100 acres, probably more, like 300 acres in size. So basically, the government bought up all the rural property.
Yeah.
Over there, and that's like, so just for location wise, it's Navasota, Texas. The government bought like thousands of acres and just converted it all to fucking solar farms. And anyway, I got summoned to go do some welding out there back when I ran my business, because, you know, they had shit break and they wanted like a thingamadoo fabricated. It was like some kind of jig for, you know, setting the solar panels and optimizing the flow, basically. You know, whatever. I made, you know, I mean, that one customer probably, you know, with multiple calls, I probably made about 15,000 off of just that one guy. He kept calling me for just miscellaneous shit.
Okay.
But yeah, just anecdotally, like, you know, and I think the reason is like they might have given up on privatizing nuclear power, because like they've privatized the solar thing, so they're just dumping all the money into solar.
See, that's kind of thing. It doesn't make any sense why, like, something that is a critical infrastructure thing. Okay, if like there is one seller of gasoline in the United States, in what world would it be a bright idea to give one person the ability to add and engage in rent seeking against the entire country, right? Something that's vitally useful for everything else, right? Because you need gas, at least right now, for the United States. You know, jacking up the prices and just engaging in rent seeking makes everything else get more expensive. And that's the problem. It's like, okay, so that also contributes to everything else becoming more expensive. And like I said in my last video, is that if the cost of living is expensive, then American labor is also expensive. And so any company that comes here to produce things, you know, because there's rent seeking at every stage of civilization, you know, you're not going to be able to produce things very efficiently, is because you're paying your toll just for somebody just because they own something, right? You know, something like nuclear fission power will just make, you know, infrastructure more efficient.
So I want to counter with kind of a different perspective. So I don't think it's necessarily about the you know, rent seeking, because like it is the government, they have a money printer, they can just print whatever the fuck they need. So at a certain point, it's not even as far as like the government being your landlord, I don't even think that's a money thing. I think it's a power thing. Like the reason, like the benefit to you know, the solar thing is they can, like, they can just turn it off. Like that's I mean, obviously inflation, but I'm saying like as far as the government goes,
think about it.
Usually rich people, the people who own everything.
Exactly, yeah, it benefits the asset class, right? So that's a very tactical and like intentional thing, right? You know, they'll basically gaslight every wagey, you know, when their income doesn't pace with inflation. So you're effectively taking a pay cut with inflation if you're not actually pacing with inflation with your, you know, your yearly or annual review, right? So it predominantly benefits the asset class, right? So it really is just rent seekers.
I'm not saying that that's not fucked up, but I will say, like, it is like why I'm gonna go. It's like one of the many reasons that I'm trying to work my way back into, you know, running my own business, is because, you know, I can just pass the inflation. Like, oh shit, prices go up for all, you know, my consumables and shit, and I need more money. I can just charge more, right? When it comes
Yeah.
to a 9 to 5, you're capped at whatever the fuck you make.
Yeah, you're capped at whatever the boss is willing to negotiate at, and they'll just gaslight you saying, well, what did you do to earn that 3% raise? Well, standard inflation is at like 5%, right? You know, you have to work harder for less, right? So I get why everybody
and
wants
like
to be a part of the
I've seen
asset class, right? But here's a better
and also
opportunity.
just to tell you how big these numbers are and how like inflated shit gets as far as like companies. And I understand they got overhead and shit, you know, so it does bite into it. I understand how it works, but I've seen the paperwork. Back when I worked at Toyota as a oil change guy, I was getting paid like fucking $10 an oil change, but they were charging the customer like fucking $600-700.
Yeah, but the thing is like, wouldn't it be better if, like, for instance, you know, something like housing was not an asset? It wasn't something that continuously appreciated, because that's what's causing the crisis with the younger generations not being able to afford things. Some things should not be treated like speculative assets. That's what I'm trying to get at, which is, you know, essentially just rent seeking in the first place, right? You know, housing should not be consistently getting more expensive. It should be getting cheaper, because this is a necessity for people just to live, right? So that's why I'm arguing that some things just shouldn't be a speculative asset.
Yeah, and I do the Alex Jones part of my brain really does kind of lean towards like the reason they're like maintaining the inflation, like the housing price inflation. I think a lot of that is you know, obviously it's for the boomers, you know, they want to see number go up, like even though they have no intention to ever sell. But also I think another part of it is like how do you pressure people into being permanent rentoids? It's like, well, you gotta eliminate their other option. The other option being, you know, buying houses.
Yeah, and that's crossroads we're at. And the unfortunate part is because it seems like, okay, it's a lot of people in the chat might be thinking that this is something they can do ad infinitum. They can just do forever. They can make everybody a perpetual renter, you know, in the future, and there's no possibility for contesting, right? But the funny part is the reason why I made my last video was to elucidate the fact is that when you do this, you know, by that same, you know, token, right? You know, we all seen the global 1% meme about how American workers are lazy, right? You know, because you've created a higher cost of living, you know, the income needed to actually exist within these areas is so much higher, which makes any company that operates in the United States absolutely uncompetitive. And that's going to be the thing that's going to bite Donald Trump in the ass, is because it doesn't matter if he wants to accept like foreign investment from China. The problem is that, you know, companies are just on paper not going to be competitive on the world stage when everybody's cost of living is incredibly high. And, you know, the average rent is $2,000 a month, which means you need to have like high incomes to actually compensate for that high cost of living.
I think what you said about the energy is just a small part of the bigger picture about America not being modernized and trying to modernize anymore. The problem is they don't invest in energy infrastructure. Like China is very successful because they just try to build to modernization better.
Okay, yeah, but that's what I'm thinking. They're just kind of going toward better modernization. You know, they're just handling automation a little bit better. Also, try and restrict, you know, try and not pull so many people up onto the stage at the same time. It's kind of hard to read the YouTube chat at the same time. I got to kind of balance between the two, but yeah. No, China's on a better path of modernization. Even if they have an aging population because of the one-child policy, it's kind of difficult to actually, the thing is, the United States is also going to have an aging population as well, as because people just aren't having kids in the first place. But, you know, they're pretty much tapping into automation to get around that. We should have one house, one family, one policy. That would free up a lot of housing. That's one of the solutions I've had, Sizer. I'm going to call you Size just because it seems a little bit easier, right? You know, what we need to do is do some kind of form of Georgism where, you know, if you have more than 2 properties, like those other properties will not be recognized as owned by you. You know, they're going to be given to some young family or whatever that's trying to settle down and just have a family, right? You know, the other solution is to build more houses if boomers really don't. But the thing is, the reason why they want to stop building more houses, okay, Lord, is because the problem is that, like, when you build more houses, you know, house prices go down as well. Is because it's just supply and demand, so they've constricted supply. Oh, hey, I caught a stream this time. What's up, Rail? Welcome to the stream. But the thing is, they constrict the supply is because they don't want prices to go down. It's because boomers in their, 9 Airbnb rentals, they want their asset prices to go up continuously, and they want their rents to go up and have a year-over-year, like, appreciation rate. And that's the problem, right? Now we're paying for this and the consequences of that, not just with the blue-collar working class, but also with the white-collar working class as well, with everything being offshore. is because it's numerically uncompetitive to actually open a business in the United States.
Well,
Heck,
Alistair,
instead they're-
also another thing
What's
to
up?
consider. Like I don't think the solution is just build more houses. We have plenty of houses. The thing is that like 90% of all the houses are sitting vacant. They're being held as assets.
Oh yeah, and
Is
that's
that
why,
how-
like, unironically, it's like, you know, that's why I said in the last video, it's like, the uncomfortable truth is, as of right now, if you want to stop the housing crisis, and you want to make American labor competitive again, you're just going to have to seize properties. You're going to have to take boomers and their 9 Airbnb rentals. You're going to have to go to the county office. You know, when the People's Revolutionary Continental Army has seized power, and we're stopping by the sheriff's office or some shit like that, being like, all right, boomers, you get to keep one property. Whichever is your favorite, you get to keep them. But the other ones, they're going to be given off to some young couple so they can settle down and have a family. And they're going to throw a fit over that. That's just the fact of it. But, you know, that's the reality of it.
It's worth pointing out, too, that, like, houses that aren't inhabited start to decay faster than houses that are.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if TS would let me
just to
say the actual
clarify-
solution is that
Hey,
just for
Alistair,
saying vacancy
just to
taxes. Yeah,
clarify,
land value tax.
you're not.
What's up?
Sorry, Alistair. Just to clarify, though, like you're not pushing like Judge Dredd commie blocks. You're pushing houses, not commie blocks.
Oh, I know. Like, so here's kind of an interesting discussion, which I might, People's Revolutionary Continental Army. Love the combination of the French, American, and Russian Revolutionary Armies. Yeah, I just kind of came up with it on the spot, man. I'm glad you enjoyed. Yeah, boomers are a liability. Net Loss did a video like a while ago, is that, like, you know, boomers are too expensive to maintain. And, you know, I'm not one of those kinds of people that likes to, like, go overly hateful on the boomers, but I can understand a lot of the hate for them is because if you really think about it, they're a generation that has a ton of real estate wealth. They also get every social benefit under the sun, plenty of social welfare. They get their benefits of pension systems when they still existed. They still get Social Security. And on top of that, they get Medicare. So I understand the hatred for them. I believe in free housing for all, but it shouldn't be individual lots, just Soviet bloc apartments. See, the funny part is that when you get into more high-density urban planning, you have to go towards apartment complexes. It's because high-density living needs to actually have that. See, the thing is that, like, you know, American cities used to actually be much better at, like, high-density living, you know, back in the day. It's just the thing is with the invention of the cars, we just literally invested everything in the car. That's the problem with the United States. We need to have a policy of how we can take cities that start off mid-size and just basically slowly transition them as their population goes up into actual, like, urban centers where they're walkable, you get rid of parking minimums, and you make it where, like, you know, you don't have to worry about, like, a housing shortage. Like, the convenience of the city should make up for what you lose with cars and, you know, space. That's my honest opinion.
Can I ask
go ahead.
a question about O'Leary? Okay. So with the whole like Kevin O'Leary thing in Utah going on right now, I'm just like wondering what the best thing that we can do as people to prevent more data centers from being built is, because I mean obviously he basically just went over the heads of everyone in that state and just worked with the 3 commissioners that actually have control over it. And
it's impressive how they piss everybody off.
Yeah, and then he's just like saying that people are getting like bussed in as like protesters, which is like I'm a big conspiracy person, but that's some crazy bullshit conspiracy shit. Like honestly,
yeah, I've seen it in my own comment section. People pointing out they're just using it to like create the permanent underclass and like this is surveillance infrastructure. It's like none of this is ever being talked about how it's actually beneficial to society, and they're surprised that people are chimping out about it. Now, how would people actually meaningfully stop the data center stuff? I'm going to be real with you, and this is going to sound like a bit of a cop-out. You know, these idiots are probably going to stop it on their own. These are the same idiots that are saying they're going to put data centers in space. Like, if they actually threw those things and launched them into space, it wouldn't work is because of the heating problem. No, that's assuming that they even powered in the first place, right? You know, the funny part is that people are just going to have a natural chimp out against these things already, and that's something I don't think most people can stop, and these people are vastly underestimating, like, you know, people having a chimp out over these data centers. So, you know, that's my opinion on that one. Yeah, technically an American communist revolution would be far more similar to how Marx envisioned it, even how impossible it is. Yeah, American communism is going to look very different than, you know, Soviet socialism or Soviet communism or even Chinese communism, is because Western civilization tends to be a tad bit more individualistic, and a lot of people don't like to admit that fact about American or even Western culture. It's something that a lot of people get very upset about, especially outside of the Anglosphere and outside of the West, but it's just a true fact about, you know, Western civilization and culture. To give an idea of how bad... Oh, did you want to say something?
They also tend to be putting them in like the worst places for like being affected for global warming on top of these things creating massive amounts of heat.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of thing. The heat thing is something that they could have solved as well, but they just don't want to, is because they're cheap asses and they just want to, like, you know, somehow they're going to beat China by cutting all these corners and producing these things. That's why I say, like, this thing's going to fall flat on its face anyways, is because they're going to waste a bunch of money doing things wrong in the first place, and it's just not going to pay off for them, and they're going to be really butthurt, as much as they want to scream about how everybody's a Chinese spy for opposing it in the first place.
Well, also, you can run AI models locally on your computer now with open weight LLMs. I think the demand for a lot of these data centers will go down eventually. And these guys are just burning cash because they want to get their capital expenditure high to justify their, you know, valuations. Because like, if you look at the tech industry, it's stagnated a lot, right? They haven't come out with like any hyper growth ideas, anything new. It's just kind of rehashing the same old playbook, which is either an advertising platform like Google or Facebook, or it's like a middleman service like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, where like they don't actually own any of the things that they're providing. They're just making other people do it, and they're just charging a toll for being on their platform, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really what this whole AI thing is. Now, if you look at how China is using AI, they're actually using it for some pretty interesting things like computer vision for drones, you know, robotics, things like that. What are we using it for? We're using it for like AI agents, like all this slop, because, you know, American capitalists, supposedly capitalists, they just want to get a quick buck somehow, and they're just, you know, they're just trying to inflate their valuations so
computer
they can
vision is like one of those things that AI would probably do very good at. And like the funny part is, like, I don't see that application very often except in China, right? OpenCV, like, don't get me wrong, OpenCV is fine and all that sort of stuff, but the thing is, computer vision is one of those things that AI would probably be very good at. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of models out there that have been posted, but like the average person out there is not going to go like look at that, set it up, because it takes a bit of skill to do. And, you know.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, they're just using it for ads and surveillance, and that's the main problem, you know. Same shit, different day. But yeah, again, it's like, the funny part is that, like, with all the stuff going down, it is literally just a waiting game, is because, unironically, it's like the ruling class of the United States is just so stupidly, like, sowing the seeds of their own destruction. So it's really just kind of a waiting game as they kind of just implode on their own terms.
They really are. And fact of the matter is that this is a bit of a white pill, because I can count 3 separate times in the past this has happened. Let's talk about the first time. The trial of King Charles I. Basically, King Charles was the king at the time, when he was finally captured and dragged before the Revolutionary Army to defend his actions as the head of state. The actions of the prosecution and the actions of the king are rather interesting, because, I guess to begin with, the prosecution, initially they just wanted the king to bend the knee and to not be such an authoritarian dickhead. Basically, bend the knee and stop dragging us into your illegal wars, stop trying to force us to give you loans that we know you won't pay back, and various other things that eventually, you know, started the war. And how did the king try to protect himself? 1, he refused to recognize the court's authority. Oh, you can't prosecute me because I am special. I can't be tried.
There's a king that said I can't be tried. That I'm a king, and he literally got his head cut off the next day. That it is amazing.
That's him. That's the guy. Yeah.
But yeah.
And then he tried to appeal to tradition and traditional English law. Oh, you mean the traditional English law that you had for the entirety of your rule, and probably a few kings before you spent your entire lifetimes deliberately undermining that tradition? What the fucking do?
Or Palantir achieves its goals. The funny thing about Palantir, okay, and like a lot of these data centers, and why I'm not really convinced that they're going to go as far, I really think that this is probably like a mother of all bubbles when it comes to AIs, because AI is not actually AI. It is literally just large language models. They're vastly overestimating like what it's going to actually do. And when it doesn't actually pay through, which we all know it hasn't, because it's all just basically investor capital at this point, the bubble's going to practically implode, and then like there's going to be a whole bunch of data centers like selling off RAM for cheap. Like, I really don't see this going very far, because it's being done so poorly, and I don't even expect it to be self-sufficient. Like, earlier in the stream, people have already talked about, like, what is this AI stuff actually being used for? Like, what is it tangibly, providing value for? Even at my workplace, it's only being used to generate, like, images for PowerPoint shows. Like, that's it.
Torment
It's
the
like,
wages.
yeah, I've never, like, that's about it. But the thing is like, there's not really much of a use outside of that. It's like, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like, Palantir is essentially literally just a giant dossier forming machine. That's all it is. It's like, they basically aggregate a ton of evidence or, like, ideas or information off of people, and they have an AI scan through it, train it on that, and they basically, like, oh, I can ask any information I want to formulate a dossier on a particular individual person. That's all Palantir really can do. They're just the dossier formation machine. So we could be mostly self-sufficient if we adopted a circular economy approach. See, the funny part is that, like, we could do that. We could actually, be energetically self-sufficient. We could actually have, like, domestic production. It's just the problem is that, like, the main thing is that the only way to make American labor more competitive is to fix the cost of living crisis. So, building a ton of houses, crashing the property bubble, building up nuclear fission power plants to make electricity cheap, right? Making oil cheap. These are all the things that need to be done to actually make, production in the United States, like, much more efficient and much more competitive. Because, when the largest employer in 43 states is just healthcare, it's kind of, pretty bad out of that. You're living in your car, comrade. Not me personally, but I know a lot of people are being forced into that because the standard of living just keeps, like, going down and getting worse. The only real question is, how much more damage to our environment and biosphere are we going to have to suffer through before the solar punk revolution finally kicks in once and for all? I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be a doomerist take, Jay. This is going to be a doomerist take. I don't really expect us to be able to... The thing is, unless if, like, here's the problem. I think what's done is done, and there's nothing you can do about it. The environment... Whatever damage that has been done to the environment is over. It's, it's already set. Like, the thing is, the only course correction you could possibly do, and this is going to sound so Fed posty, it's not even funny, if, like, somehow a radical political party with all the right ideas just managed to seize power and then do all the right things, which is, an entirely different thing. First, it takes a radical political party to actually change power and seize power, and then on top of that, they also have the right ideas. And the chances of that is highly unlikely. Which is why I say I don't want to be too doomer-pilled. I don't want to be too black-pilled on it, but the thing is, the damage that's been done to the biosphere is, already done. There's not much that you can do to course-correct it. Is because when it comes to changing civilization, when it comes to, moving, these things around and actually changing up the infrastructure in the United States, these things don't happen overnight. These things are large-scale, civilizational projects that have to be done.
Do you mind if I have a mixture of wage rage, or I guess it would count as wage rage because a lot of my wage did go into this.
Yeah,
and it's also kind of talking about the way things are going. So okay. I think a big thing that is going on in America that is like making it lose to China is we could be doing a whole lot of bad decisions and over, and we would still probably get out ahead just because of tons of legacy shit. But the problem is we constantly shoot ourselves in the foot over and over, like with Iran, like with every Middle Eastern conflict, like with our veterans, there are so many examples, it's really stupid. And one example that is personal for me that makes me hate Lindsey Graham with a passion.
That guy's such a cock.
Okay, I am a South Carolina resident. I've been most of my life. I basically grew up here, and I love the state. I love a lot of the people in the state. 2024, during Hurricane Helen, the entire communities were wiped out by that fucking hurricane. Communities that in some cases still haven't recovered. My family personally had to pay so much money just repairing what happened to them, and like also donating a bunch to help get their community back apart. Point is, it fucked over so many people, it's ridiculous. This could have been an easy slam dunk for America, because it wouldn't have taken that many resources to help.
Half-asses everything. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then I'll give him some credit. There was some help. while our power was out for several weeks, the military showed up and gave us MREs that we were very grateful for.
There you go.
Like they gave us generators, they gave us fuel. That was really great. If they put even the bare...
Yeah, see, the funny thing is, like, with all the efficiency thing, right? You know, like, I talked about this a couple of times. One thing they could do right now is quite literally, if they wanted to save fuel, like, you want to talk about efficiency, all they have to do is quite literally, for all, like, these office workers, you know, just put them on remote work, decongest the entire roadway, make people use less gas, there would be less traffic on these roadways, and then start distributing workloads, not just on first shift, but also second and third shift. But again, it's like, United States doesn't do that, you know. We're even doing the abolition of swing schedules in the workplace and forcing managers to actually consistently plan employees on a consistent shift, right? The thing is that, like, you know, to actually get people to do something that's actually legitimately efficient for all of civilization is incredibly difficult, which is why I want to get back to the original topic about the other guy pointing out what's it going to take to actually stop the destruction of the biosphere. That's the hard truth. Trying to get everybody on the same page, and then also with the right ideas, is a slim to none chance, which is why it's like, you don't want to be too doom-pillar, but, you know, this, what's going to come is what's going to come. So, but go on.
I get you, but the thing is, to repair even to like, let's say, slightly below the level it was at before, it wouldn't have taken that much. There have been disaster relief programs that have worked way better. Do you know what happened when Lindsey Graham, in all of his fucking glory, he asked the very bold question to all of our South Carolina residents. He asked, "Oh well, what are the people in Israel? What's going on in Israel?"
They had to get their $7,000 check to fucking glaze Israel. Wonderful.
Yeah, we need to pay attention to fucking Israel, and like.
You can't make this shit up, man.
I swear to God, when I was sitting in my home without power, just on my phone, using a goddamn battery to power it, and I saw Lindsey fucking Graham talk about Israel. Oh my! To this day, I am so fucking angry. I do not know. Like, it has been years, and I will still be angry. In 10 years, I will still be angry because that. Oh my God!
Fucking Israel! It's in the middle of a disaster. How can we think of Israel? Did you see that shit with like Erica Kirk being like,
I just posted the fucking link. I posted the link in the chat.
What irritates me even more
is
people who don't like Israel. I'm like, seriously? Like, you managed to get a propaganda talking point in on your stupid little grievance story? Really? The shit that people do for clout and grifting.
I wouldn't care if he shilled for Israel at literally any other fucking time. But like, I would say that's probably what made me like fully commit to leftist economics, because I thought there is no fucking way I will be anywhere near the side of that guy. That guy, no, absolutely not. Anyway, that's I guess suppressed wage rage for several years. That will
that's
still
a well-earned
exist.
one. I didn't know that. That's hilarious.
I would recommend everyone watch that fucking video of Lindsey Graham so you can feel a fraction of my hate.
Hurricane Helen still has
It's
people
all good.
displaced up here in North Carolina.
Posted the
so.
announcement because that's fucking funny. But yeah, Jesus Christ.
I hope everyone hates Lindsey Graham. That, like, if I can convince anyone
Lindsey
of
Graham
anything,
is because he's like one of those
Lindsey
super
Graham.
austerity cucks, and you know it doesn't surprise me that he's like, you know, quite literally just shilling for Israel. He spends his free time to
while
basically
we were
milk a
having a
crisis to
disaster.
shill for Israel. That's impressive. That's some that's some top tier grifting, man. That's impressive.
I feel like goddamn am. 10,000 miles of hurricane area, and if I could write hate on every piece of scrap wood, it wouldn't even amount to 1/10 of the hate I feel for Lindsey Graham at this micro instant. Anyway, that's about it. I got
that was
to let
actually
that
a good
out.
am impression, man. But that was hilarious. But yeah, no, it's impressive what people do for clout to grift for stuff, dude. It's actually genuinely impressive, like what these people do. Most people don't use cars since they want it. They need it for necessity since urban planners and local officials are paid out by car companies to force us. It's those incentive structures that quite literally are going to doom the United States. Is because the fact is, instead of just doing efficient planning, it's like the whole real estate bubble, man. The whole real estate bubble is predicated on the idea that you get all the wages in the big urban centers because everything's more expensive, so they pay like extra for rent and all the expensive city prices, and they also get their property values to go up. You know, that's the insanity of like the American system, and it's biting it in the ass. It's like, you know, there's really no other way to do it on that stuff. You know, it's kind of amazing with American companies where, you know, they will demand that everybody return to the office. They go work in, you know, these major cities where rent's incredibly high, right? You know, if you don't accept these terms and conditions, if you don't accept any of the things that they want to do to overvalue their property prices, what's the first thing that they do? What do these companies do? Do they go to like West Virginia to invest in that part of the country that is impoverished, that has low property prices? No, they just go straight to India. It's impressive. It's like, you know, there's plenty of cities that would love to take economic investment from these companies, but they don't do that. They just go straight to another country if you don't accept their terms and conditions on their maximum exploitation of the wagey control centers, you know, which are just most major cities. And that's not to knock major cities. I think, you know, urban planning could actually make cities a decent place to live. It's just the fact that the United States is the worst when it comes to urban planning. Lindsey Graham sounds like a bee. Sounds like another billion to Israel. Yeah, isn't real. Yeah, absolutely, dude. I've never liked that guy, is because the fact is, it's funny how much he shills for Israel, but then he's a hardcore austerity guy. It's amazing like how these people love austerity, but when it comes to giving out money and welfare, it's like it's all of a sudden suspended for Israel. It's actually impressive. I hate fucking driving, and I live in a car. Give me a working public transportation. I can use a car, you know, to live in and work. Yeah, the funny part is I hate that, okay, Lord, is because the fact is not only are they trying to criminalize homelessness, which is just incredibly barbaric and stupid, right? But the thing is, they make you have to have a car for literally everything. They don't want a walkable city. They want you to basically spend gas, buy these overpriced vehicles that they won't even allow you to import, like cheap Chinese vehicles to actually get yourself on your own feet. God knows like how expensive car prices are these days. They don't like that. But again, all these things are coming home to roost, because the fact is, as much as I talk about rent-seeking parasites on my live streams, as much as I talk about them in my videos, and the reason why it's like, you know, it's amazing that like some people are like, oh, we need to do something about these people like right this very second, right? And people have want to see actions because they're suffering and all this sort of stuff, right? The thing about it is that the United States is a declining empire because of these facets of reality, because it refuses to stubbornly evolve on any of these things. And so as long as it continues going down this path, you know, the United States will always fall behind on, you know, China, right? Don't get me started on fucking fixing your car. Oh, yeah, and then the repair costs they have to do. You know, I had to replace, and I was telling Ty about this a little bit earlier, right? Get some spark plugs. You know, this repair place wanted to charge $300 to replace spark plugs, and then $1.2K on an AC line into the compressor. And I was like, a metal pipe isn't worth that much. Took it to one of my buddies, got it repaired for like $500, much cheaper. Really cool guy, and I gave him like $100 tip. I'm like, dude, you didn't rip me off. Here's another $100. You're cool. I'll be giving you my business from here on out, right? But it's amazing like how much scamming and like ripping off happens at every stage of society. You know, it's hard. You really got to find like those people that don't engage in that kind of practice. I spend so much time on money and special tools and the scanner to fix basic stuff. Or I just want a modern Toyota Hilux. Absolutely, dude. I would love to have a Toyota Hilux. I would love to have like affordable cars that are not like $30,000 or $40,000. That's what I would love. You know, because, you know, think about it this way. It's like if we had good public transportation, we had efficient public transportation, wouldn't this also benefit the capitalist class as well? Is because they would have access to like cheaper labor. They wouldn't have to spend so much on cars, housing, or whatever, right? You know, the capitalist class is always talking about how American workers are lazy and need to work less for more, or, you know, for less, right? You know, but the thing is, they don't set up into the infrastructure that would make American labor cheaper to facilitate at all. They don't create high-speed rails to make it easy for people to move this between centers, right? You know, imagine if like one company, like these data centers that are being propped up in the country, right? One's being propped up, I don't know, in New York City or whatever, right? When they're done with that, all the contracted laborers should be able to easily move from one location of the country to another, right? You know, maybe they're going to prop up a data center in another part of the country. Wouldn't it be better if labor was more mobile to go across the country to work on other projects rather than being stuck in like a 12-month lease or even just being stuck in expensive houses, right? You know, this is the unfluidity of American labor, or just the labor force, is really going to be another thing that's going to contribute to us falling behind, you know, in the long run. But people don't think about this stuff. You know, these things, you know, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, and that's what the American empire is going to go through, is because, you know, if you're not actually long-term planning civilization, you know, you're just going to eventually bleed out by death by 1,000 paper cuts. Short-term games over long-term games. Nothing we can do can fix people given the golden spoon in all their lives. That's the tough one, is because the fact is the people whose interests need to be affected for change to happen is once again the billionaire class. These are the people that need to be affected for them to actually implement the proper change. Just look at like the data centers that they propped up, right? No bureaucratic lashback whatsoever. They're just propping it up at the speed of light, but they can't do that with nuclear fission power plants, right? This is the stupid shit that the billionaire class needs to actually come to terms with, otherwise they will just lose to China. That's just an obvious fact of reality. But, you know, why, but is it smart for me to criticize them? Because I don't like the billionaire class. They're fucking up. They're destroying civilization, so they're just kind of destroying themselves in the end. So, like, is it really that much skin off my nose? Like, everybody hates these billionaires, and so they're just destroying themselves in the long run, is because they just can't do these things in a proper or meaningful way. Lemafal, like, no, the capitalist class wants wants to own public transportation, if not that publicly owned transportation that infringes on their car and their rideshare, exact their profits. Yeah, that's the thing. What's up, John Galt? What's up, man?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but on the topic of public transportation, I think the biggest issue is not like building it or the political will. Like, people don't want to take public transit because of how dangerous it is in cities like New York City.
Exactly. I've talked about that a lot. I do have a dedicated video coming out to that, is because the fact is the one thing of why major urban centers, people do not use public transportation is because they feel unsafe in it. You know, they don't want to get stabbed on their way to work, right?
It's not just the unsafe aspect. It's the fact that when these people do those things, it's never prosecuted. And if you try to defend
it's unsafe
yourself,
and it's not punished.
Yeah,
so yes, you feel unsafe.
Right? It's anarcho-tyranny. Like, for example, I live in Texas. We have permitless concealed carry here, and I carry a gun with me everywhere I go. But I would avoid public transit as much as I can. I've never taken public transit here once because of this very issue, right? Like, when I visit countries like Japan or South Korea, like, I take public transit all the time. I don't care, because I know that, you know, one, it's a pretty peaceful and non-violent society. And if anybody does anything, they'll probably get arrested for it, right? Like, in New York City, Daniel Penny got arrested and charged. Thankfully, he was, you know, not convicted.
Yeah.
Then, like, the perpetrators, they just get away with it with like a slap on the wrist every time. And then to your earlier point about like real estate, like, it's the same issue. Like, there actually is a lot of really cheap real estate out there, but nobody wants to live there because you're going to share a neighborhood with the very same people. You're going to hear gunshots every night. You're going to have like gang turf wars, you know, on your street.
I've talked with my buddies about this quite some time now, and I get called the conservative for saying this. Yes, I do believe in being tough on crime, is because you can't have a safe and civilized society if people don't feel safe going outside in the streets, right? Is it really freedom when you can't actually walk around at night and just be left alone, where you're constantly at the risk of being stabbed or shot, right? You know, it's that, you know, persistent feeling. Of course, nobody, especially if you have a family, you're ever going to use public transportation if these things have a ton of crime on them. Like, I agree with you 100%. That's one of the things that's different about this channel, is because I'm very much of the opinion that if you want to have good public transportation, especially in the inner city, you're just going to have to be tough on crime. That's just par for the course. So,
yeah, it actually does create a lot of like economic problems, because now everybody is forced to buy a car. Now everybody is forced to pay an excessive amount of money to live in those few neighborhoods that are, you know, middle class or upper class. And therefore, you know, you don't have enough money left over to start a business or, you know, invest in something productive other than like more real estate.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you 100%. But yeah, no, like, hopefully that's something that'll get fixed in the near future. Obviously, if I had a hand on that power, I would probably 100% be a lot tougher on crime. That's just a fact. Like, one of the things I've said for a little while now is that if I became like dictator tomorrow or whatever, right? Hypothetical, we can all speak in hypotheticals, right? Is that, you know, first thing I would do with the homeless population is, you know, when it comes to cracking down on homelessness, I wouldn't necessarily have the police crack down on homelessness or make homelessness a crime. I would 100% get rid of those laws first and foremost, but I would also make it terms and conditions where, like, you know, there would be for locations where they could set up, you know, tent cities and whatever, right, until we can address the housing crisis, but someplace where they're not consistently being pushed around by the local police. Is because I've always found that to be incredibly cruel and inhuman, that you just kind of push people around who are already going through tough stuff. We already have a cost of living crisis, right? So letting people settle in a location where they're not going to consistently get pushed around by the local police or state police or whatever, right? And have some stability, you know, we'll let them have that and maybe a tent city or whatever until the cost of housing has been brought down, right? But under the one condition, right? You know, no drugs, you know, good policing, and essentially that you basically keep like the dregs and like the kind of like degenerate aspects of, you know, these kinds of, you know, tent cities, you know, down, right? You know, you accept the terms and conditions of policing with these communities, so drugs don't, you know, you don't have rampant like drugs, you know, running throughout the community, and you can have at least a decent community until you get, you know, these people back on their feet. That would be my policy if I had the opportunity to do that, right? You know, it'd be like, okay, we're not going to do this cruelty of just pushing people around, but, you know, we're going to allow people to set up little tent cities, but, you know, the terms and conditions are that, you know, you allow people to police things like, you know, crime and drug usage and cut down on that.
Well, the reason why the tent cities exist where they are is because of proximity to, you know, social services and, you know, free food and stuff like that, right? And the thing that always confused me was like, why would you put that in like a central business district like the downtown? Like, there's a lot of other places where you could put that wouldn't.
You could humanely deal with the homeless population and then also address the cost of living crisis to get people back up on their feet. But again, it's like, you know, if you tried to basically allow like a tent city or a shanty town for like homeless people to kind of set themselves up and just kind of exist independently of civilization without trying to have the police push them around a ton, right? You know, Fox News would smear you saying you're just allowing like a high crime like area within your city, right? Even if you were to basically go through with actually policing these, you know, shanty towns to make sure that drugs don't go running through it, right? You know, because at the end of the day, you want people to be integrated and rehabilitated into civilization, correct?
No. The people who are running the homeless industrial complex don't want these people to be integrated, because if the problem gets fixed, they can't make any money off of it anymore, right? Because the people who are providing all these services, they're billing the government like an excessive amount of money, like $60,000 for one tent, just like one tent. Like, that's more than I've ever paid in rent in a year in my entire life. And like, even like the most luxurious, you know, apartment I've ever rented, I've never spent $60K a year on rent. And then all the directors of these nonprofits are all making like $300,000-$400,000, right? And if they fix the problem, then they won't make any money. And I think one of the reasons why this is going on is because there's a lot of pressure for people to make it into the higher socioeconomic classes. And, you know,
they're doing performative charity to make themselves feel better, and they're also taking money while they do it. And there's a financial incentive for them to abuse the system. Like, I agree.
Right, because they don't have a productive way to make it into that class by like working, right? Because with, you know, all the other economic policies of these, you know, Democrat cities mostly, with high taxes and so on, like it's a lot more difficult to, you know, get rich through like a legitimate way, such as, again, starting your own business or providing real value, right?
Oh yeah,
so
I agree.
They go towards these, you know, I really just call it fraud, to be honest, but
it is. It's just literally money laundering. It's, you know, taking advantage of the bureaucracy, but you got to start somewhere, you know? Like, that's all you can do. Like, that, the solution that I gave on my stream is something what I would do if I had like an ounce of power. That's just my 2 cents. But the thing is, you got to start somewhere, and you got to be able to crack down. And that's more or less deficit spending. That's public spending that you're going to have to basically take control of and start pulling like the budget on certain things, in my honest opinion, if you want to stop that kind of out of control spending. Like, unironically, if somebody was making $60K off of setting up a tent, right? That's something you could bring up to a budget meeting and be like, why are you wasting $60,000 of taxpayer dollars, you know, to set up a tent? You're not helping anybody. You're not contributing to solving the actual problem at hand. You're just putting up a tent to make yourself feel better and then giving yourself a pat on the back and taking $60,000, right? So I agree with you, you know, but this is just my 2 cents on what I think is the best way to actually like tackle this particular problem. But yeah, I'm gonna go back to reading people in the chat, is because I like to swap between like reading the YouTube chat but also talking to people on the stage. You know, it's kind of a balancing game, so, you know, take that as you will. You know, it's gonna go back and forth between the two. Yep, I heard from a famous streamer, the first thing that people do in the free market is not to make anything free anymore. Yeah, no, Peter Thiel has a very famous article. It's like, you know, the monopoly is like the ultimate goal of every capitalist. You know, the thing is that capitalists eat free market capitalism. They don't respect the rules of free market capitalism. And so the solution to that is not so much to necessarily like oppose free markets or competition, because competition and markets can actually be a good thing if you actually control them in the proper way. Some things are naturally monopolistic and should be brought under social control, just because the fact is they would just engage in rent seeking if they were not brought under social control. But you know, markets and competition can actually do a lot of good things. But the thing is, you need to stop the capitalist class from quite literally cannibalizing competition and taking it down to engaging in monopolistic rent-seeking behaviors, because then you're just going to end up with what we have in the United States currently. There's only two industries in America, fraud and gambling. Well, that's the outcome of everything after we've hollowed out all our industry, manufacturing, and soon-to-be tech and engineering. Yep, I heard from a famous streamer. Okay, anyways, how long will it take for them to outlaw kids making lemonade stands? That's already outlawed. Fun fact, by the way. Quote by Robespierre. Yeah, Robespierre. That's kind of the thing. Robespierre is an interesting case, is because the fact is I think everybody has felt that level of hatred towards the ruling classes at one point or another, you know, just by living in current society to understand it. But at the end of the day, right, you know, Robespierre, people like Robespierre can actually get away with the stuff that they're doing if they learn to be proper statesmen. That's the funny thing, right? You know, at one point or another, you can't just be a perpetual revolutionary. You do have to actually improve civilization after whatever revolutionary instant happens. To curb the violent gangs, I mean working with the mafia to put down violent crime a lot. You know, the funny part is Andrew Jackson worked with pirates to fight the British, so it's not an uncommon thing which new governments do, or revolutionary governments do. Fun fact. I feel that all the time. I read his speeches so often. You know, you're going to see more revolutionary sentiment kind of arise in the United States. That's kind of an inevitability. Like, the reason why people are coming here so often, they're watching the videos, they're talking about the cost of living crisis, is because all of us, you know, subtly know that the cost of living crisis is not actually getting better. People's lives are getting worse, and the people who are, you know, in the existing infrastructure in society are not doing anything to actually make civilization better. Like I said in my previous video, you know, when it comes to the uncompetitive nature of American labor, you know, there are two sides which are going on in the mainstream establishment uniparty, if you want to call it that, okay? You know, the one thing is that, you know, the Republican Party is quite literally just, their solution to uncompetitiveness for American labor is just to, you know, engage in economic protectionism and tariffs. We've done that for a year and a half. It doesn't work. What is the Democrat Party's solution, you know, to this problem of uncompetitive American labor? Import a bunch of migrant labor or offshore things to make American labor competitive. It's just offsetting the cost and ignoring that the cost of living crisis and the fact that rent and the cost of living is far outpaced the cost of labor, you know, is the main reason why American labor is not competitive. That is a hard truth, and until people address that fact, until people address the elephant in the room, that is the rent-seeking class, you know, American labor and American industry will always be uncompetitive. That is the whole reason why they offshore and outsource things. That's just a fact of reality. Government working with organized crime, no way. You know, Operation Fast and the Furious under the Barack Obama administration. I would say the greatest sin the Bolsheviks committed was in fact that they let Iran live. That's funny. Ayn Rand is such an insufferable person. It's like, you know, the funny part is I remember when I watched Ayn Rand, like that's probably, like I don't want to sound a little bit cringy as like an ex-libertarian, but like I did read a lot of that individualist philosophy, but the thing is at one point or another, you get to a level of individualism that is just overall not conducive to a healthy civilization. Any healthy civilization will not be overly collectivistic nor overly individualistic, right? You know, when you have an overly collectivist civilization, you know, it's not capable of original thought. It just follows whatever the mindless majority, you know, thinks of at any given point in time, right? Hyper-individualism, you've all seen to basically be what the modern state of American society is right now, right? So you always need a balance between the two. I mean, isn't Marco Rubio enfranchising criminals, lol? Yeah, I could believe it. For Robespierre, he was ejected to the Estates General, then joined with the National Assembly and became an influential voice in the Jacobin Club. Yeah, I believe that. Both parties agree on outsourcing, just make it impossible for anyone now to sleep in an old bed the way I see it. Baba Vanga predicted the global peasant revolt by 2070. The babushka was a psychic lol. Yeah, the thing is that, like, we already, like, the thing is we're at the end of the American Empire, right? And so the fact is, it's like a lot of people are either going to go into the camp of shilling for China and Russia, or they can kind of just accept the fact that, like, you know, things need to change here for things to happen in the first place. This isn't necessarily new. A similar thing was going on in the 1890s when you had, like, rapid industrialization and the robber barons, you know, growing into prominence, right? And so, you know, the interesting thing is that, like, if it were up to me on how a society should be organized on handling, you know, market competition to benefit society, you know, things that are not naturally monopolistic, where you can have natural competition, should be left to the market, but anything that is naturally monopolistic should just be brought under social control, turned into a state-owned enterprise, or even nationalized. I simply don't think mass immigration would be necessary in proletarian dictatorship. We can replace underpaid Indians with large numbers of unemployed Americans given livable wages. Yeah, absolutely. No, you don't need mass immigration. So here's kind of the thing. You know, it's almost disingenuous that the mainstream left, when I criticize mass immigration, okay, I criticize mass immigration not because I have like some kind of ethnic chauvinism against foreigners, because at the end of the day, right, I don't have a problem with foreigners, but the thing is the amount of people that they're bringing in en masse is quite literally to undercut, antagonize domestic labor, right? You know, under the conditions of a dictatorship of the proletariat, you wouldn't have this many, you know, mass immigration. People would be coming to the United States or whatever culture and country without the need to basically undercut or even antagonize the domestic working class, right? And so the thing is like on an individual basis, yeah, I'm not against immigration on an individual basis, but it is 100% being abused to antagonize the domestic working class, and that's the problem I have. I come at it from a class background, not so much from a racial or ethno-chauvinistic background. In this government, there are two personalities, a twisted freaking psychopath and a twisted freaking psychopath. Yeah, two sides of the same coin. They're just here to exploit and benefit themselves at the expense of everybody else. Any thoughts on PragerU? I think PragerU, and here's the funny part. I've said this for a while. There's a video on my channel that talked about how they want to erase the past to control the future. And I talked about how Ben Shapiro and the PragerU types were going to become progressively less popular as time went on, is because even the most right-leaning people in their audience, you know, if they might agree on every social conservative value that they agree with, but at the end of the day, if the average person, especially in the younger generations with Gen Z, if they cannot afford their own homes, if they cannot afford to settle down and have families and live the traditionalist lifestyle that they themselves agree with, PragerU types, the Daily Wire types, you know, at one point or another, they're going to go to the economic leftist side of the aisle just by the fact that they're being mocked and ridiculed by an older generation that was afforded this lifestyle that the younger generations are not afforded themselves. And so I think PragerU is on the way out. I think Ben Shapiro is on the way out. I think the future of politics, especially with younger generations, and I'm not I don't like Nick Fuentes, you know, much, but the thing is, his side of the aisle, or the far right, and also the economic left, in honest terms, are probably going to be the future of politics in the United States. Once boomers start croaking, like, these are going to be the main, you know, left and right aisles within the United States. It's probably going to be much closer to the 1920s than it is with like the center right and the center left, which you see with the boomer sloppulous retards. Because if you look at the older generations, right, and their politics, okay, you have the center right boomer sloppulous, you know, retards you have to deal with all the time if you're on the far right, and you probably have no doubt dealt with these idiots. With the boomer left, right, you know, they are these bizarre sexual revolutionaries that haven't realized that they've gotten old and that like most of their like hippie lifestyle is just no longer relevant in today's affairs, and nobody really cares about their stupid little polycules, right? So, but they're all both like staunchly free market capitalists, which, you know, younger generations just don't care about, including myself. I don't care about their stupid little sexual revolutionary polycules. Like, they can do whatever they want, but I care about whether or not I, as an ordinary American citizen, as an ordinary American worker, can afford my own home and be left alone. And that's what I think the direction of politics of the future is. Why I don't think PragerU, the Daily Wire, or more or less the conventional right-wing talking points are going to be really relevant in the near future once boomers really start to get flushed out of politics. On that, I do believe Alistair spoke of an elite class on the lead in the form of revolution, like the Jacobins of the French and the Bolsheviks of the Russians. Yeah, the thing is that, like, you know, if I look at history and recognize that every revolutionary, like, yeah, every revolution that's existed throughout history, whether it's a spontaneous revolution that's led by the masses, which more of the over-socialized types, you know, try to romanticize, is that every instance where there's been a successful revolution, there's been a counter-elite that's been able to guide and direct the rage of the masses into seizing power. Every single time. Okay? And so my recognition of an elite guiding the masses into the seizure of power to the benefit of themselves, or the formation of a counter-elite, is just a recognition is that, like, you know, for a counter-elite to form, they need to tap into the discontentment of the masses, into the seizure of power to give the masses what they want. That's what I consider myself an elitist, is more or less just a recognition of this reality or fact of history. We used to be a proper country that could handle immigration too. We used to have an Ellis Island. Yeah, no, we used to be a lot more, you know, restrictive on immigration. And honestly, like, I think, like, just closing the border for like 30 or some odd years, maybe even 40 years, would probably, like, you know, chill people out, considering how bad ethnic tensions are in the United States. You know, if you haven't been paying attention to the Chud the Builder stuff, it's like, yeah, ethnic tensions are pretty high. And so just closing the borders for like 30 or 40 years just to get people to settle down probably would be a solution to that problem. Social leftists see the destitute and the refugees on the same way you see poor animals in advertisements. Yeah, that's kind of the thing. They're bleeding heart leftists. That kind of leftism is kind of going out the window. I'm finding the Anglosphere radical left is losing momentum. Why is that you think they have the natural narrative today? Because the average house price is $500,000, and even if a far-right person might actually agree with you on all your cultural values, is that if they can't live the standard of living that they watch their parents live through, they're going to embrace alternative economic systems to achieve that standard of living where they could have the same standard of living as people in the 1950s. That's why I say that. I'm not saying, like, you know, the progressive left that you see of the Democrat Party. That's never been the thesis of any of my talking points in any of my videos, but an alternative left where they actually talk about the cost of living crisis and economic politics that benefit the American worker. Nick Fuentes seems to be more of an opportunistic figure chasing whatever's popular at any given moment. He's a sloppulous. Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that one, you know. Let's just hope they didn't make up their mind and already don't agree to genocide us like many of the globalist elite talk about. See, the funny part is people fearmonger about that. And, you know, I understand where they're coming from is because I don't doubt that the ruling class sees it that way. Like, I don't doubt. I'm convinced that they do believe that, they're fully engaged in the Club of Rome stuff. They want to do the depopulationism stuff. They want to set up the surveillance state. They want to set those ticks in the field so people can't eat meat or whatever, right? I've seen all the conspiracy theories, and I don't doubt for a second that our ruling class, as depraved as they are, and how many of them are implicated in the Epstein files, hasn't, participated in a similar plot of depopulationism whatsoever, right? I don't disagree with that. I think that if they were actually going to do it, they're doing a very piss poor job of that, and they're just pissing everybody off, along the way of doing that. And that's why I made it the analogy at my last video, where the way I see the billionaire class is like a person who thinks they've won the lottery, they've won $1 million or something like that, and they just like start yelling at people, making fun of people, they quit their job, they beat up a couple of people, right? And they think they're beyond reproaches because they think that has been their lotto ticket to basically be completely as irresponsible as they want to, right? The wealthy are in a similar boat with AI, in my honest opinion. They've jumped the gun, they jumped the shark, they put the cart before the horse, and so at the same time, they're also pissing off everybody else. And, even if they really wanted to do what you're saying, Old Guard House, is that, they can't do it logistically as of right now, and they're just going to cause a revolution that's going to oust them from power before they even get in the position to do that in the first place. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is that, like, they're doing it in such a stupid way that they've kind of really shot themselves in the foot on how to actually do it. The water crisis with a subsequent famine will push things hard left without sound planning to mitigate the damage. That's what I'm basically saying. The thing is like, I'm in a sort of sense been vindicated on this direction of the way things are going at, is because the fact is the establishment right doesn't want to address the elephant in the room, which is the economic problems that the United States is going through. All they do is mock and, insult the younger generations. AFK, the historical communist countries are basically labor autarchies. They don't use foreign labor. Yeah, even the Soviet Union, as much as they were internationalists, they didn't rely on foreign labor to undercut domestic labor. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Wait, I do have a question about the elite class. What does the elite class do after the revolution? One of the main issues of the Soviets was the counter-elite enshrined themselves in the government. Well, the thing is they're just gonna manage the affairs of society, just like the existing elite, used to manage the affairs of this society, right? They either do a good job of it or they do a bad job of it, and they have a revolution that basically ousts them from power. That's all there is to it. What do you think about Matt Walsh? I think Matt Walsh is a bit more sensible than Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro has completely doubled down on his stupidity, and he's just become ever more out of touch, but Matt Walsh seems to be a little bit more sensible of what younger generations are going through, and I could be completely wrong, is because I'm not a regular watcher of Matt Walsh. Do you think the Greens in the UK, USA, AU are going to get voting blocks against the Uniparty? It's hard to say. That's really up to the Green parties, because the fact is the Green parties, especially with like a lot of mainstream leftist parties, is they just say some really just stupid stuff that just drives people up the wall, and then people just lose interest in them really quickly, right? So I don't know if any of the establishment political parties of the economic left are going to get very far, but they're free to prove me wrong. But they are gaining some momentum when it comes to, because of the cost of living crisis. I found out America was not America when I had to go to 3 stores and over 30 minutes to get 1 cup of coffee. Why does it take 30 minutes and multiple trips for a cup of coffee? The American dream is dead. Because everything relies on cars. That's essentially it. We don't have any walkable infrastructure, and on top of that, we're not actually building infrastructure for a growing population. That's the problem. And it makes it incredibly difficult for anybody to actually live in this country. On the topic of elites, there's 2 definitions, one being the ruling class, the other one being the cream of crop and the smartest and the best thinking people. Does this make sense or no? It does, because the fact is the 2 definitions of elites that you just described is, one is basically describing an elite as in, a group of people who are the cream of the crop and the smartest, right? And the other one being the existing ruling class. Those 2 definitions can converge, where you have a ruling class that is competent at running a civilization. That has happened before in society. Like, for instance, Augustus Caesar and the Pax Romana, right? You know, in the era that started under that part of Roman history, right? You know, you had an elite class that was also incredibly skilled at governing things, but they were also the actual ruling class of the society. What we have today is a ruling class that is not an elite in any kind of metric, and I've watched a channel by, I think it's like Right Wing Coalition, who kind of, you know, asked the question, why are elites so unimpressive? It has to do with the fact that our elites don't actually want to be elites, and they don't actually want to govern civilization effectively, right? And so those two definitions can diverge. For instance, our existing ruling class is not actually interested in governing things, they're just interested in engaging in endless rent-seeking and making a passive income off of everybody. While, like, you know, the people who are actually meritocratic, you know, are getting pushed out of these roles, and that's also partially why the United States is just falling behind so much on so many things. For better or for worse. I feel like a child can't I can't afford to move out, and it's not fair. It sucks, man. But the funny part is like, not only that, you can't afford to move out, but even if you did move out, you would essentially be poor. You'd be house poor if you bought a house, too. So, you know, either way, it's going to suck. We just grew up in a terrible time to be an American at the end of the day. They figure they can't breed the smartest people or scientists. They don't want thinkers or workers. They don't want thinkers, and workers are being flushed out. Yeah, that's at the end of the day. They want people to think, but not too terribly much. That's why the ruling classes always hated the intelligentsia to some degree, is because when they think too much, it inconveniences the ruling classes. Oh yeah, I almost got mugged on public transportation when nobody was on. The wildest stuff was when a bunch of gang members walked in on a drug addict trying to mug the dude that was next to me. So yeah, no, that's the thing. Like, if we can actually make public transportation safe, then, you know, most people would have no problem with, like, the inner city having, like, good public transportation. They pose as the revolution like they do now. Yeah, Alex Karp is a perfect example of that. You know, pretending to be a blue-collar working-class person, but then he's, like, got a background in philosophy. That's one of the most insulting things ever, is because the fact is what the bourgeois class likes to do, or the existing ruling class likes to do, is they don't actually like to govern society effectively, but they like to astroturf or pretend that they're a popular side, and in a sort of ironic way make themselves hated even more by everybody else in society. Do you think democracy will continue in the near future? If so, to what extent? See, the funny part, whether there's a formal democracy or not, is that there's always going to be an elite that's going to be pulling the strings of a society, right? You know, I call it the shadow hierarchy, if you want to call it that. It sounds kind of spooky, but it's really not. It's the idea is that, like, whatever social group you have, any organization you have, right? You might have the formal hierarchy that's set up and prescribed, but there's always going to be a handful of people that are really in control of the situation. They're the ones pulling the strings. They're the ones who are running things, you know, behind the scenes. And sometimes you get a leader like Napoleon Bonaparte, who is basically both the public figure, but also the head honcho, okay? You know, you get leaders like that. But a lot of the times when it comes to most organizations, groups, or whatever, right? You know, you have a group of people that are the ones really running the show, right? So whether a system is a formal democracy or not, I don't particularly care about. I care about whether or not, you know, an existing elite is actually governing civilization effectively. Now, when it comes to systems, I think that is conducive to forming an effective elite. You know, I choose a dictatorship of the proletariat as like a mode or a vehicle of selecting an effective elite, is because the elite picked within a dictatorship of the proletariat is one that's, you know, based on, you know, skill or merit. You know, that's my opinion. All Western governments follow lobby groups in per capita of who fund it. Sponsored by the shadow government or the deep state or whatever, right? You know, yeah, these things are always going to exist, in my honest opinion. But yeah. So I think Asuna wants to come to the stage. So what's up, dude, if you want to come up? But yeah, that's my 2 cents on, like, you know, when it comes to an elite running or governing a civilization. So, what's up, Asuna? How's it going?
Yeah, good. Sorry, I kind of forgot what I was gonna ask directly, so I might just take a second and think about it again.
Oh yeah, it's okay, man. I'm gonna, you know, bring up Indeed because I think he has a question. I'll bring you back up on the stage if you do remember it, though. Time for bedtime. I'm about to, yeah, fair, dude. You have a good night, okay, Lord. What's up, Indeed?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up, man?
Okay, so I was just kind of curious. So I apologize if you've talked about this before in other ones, but
what's up?
Like, the right wing has a lot of like left-leaning tendencies, kind of like third way type stuff, if you will.
Yeah,
but, do you see a path where there's going to be some sort of a coalition of people on the left and right kind of merging to form kind of like I guess the right word is coalition to kind of overthrow the current elites? Or do you think it's going to be the current elites pitting us against each other? Because I see a lot that both sides have in common.
there's a lot of division, but at the end of the day, I think people are going to form a coalition of like common interests, you know, especially among economic interests, because the cost of living crisis has gotten so bad recently. You know, the average person can't afford their own home. You know, they're being, you know, they're liquid, like the labor force is completely downsizing. There's almost mass unemployment. So the thing is, it's like, you know, the entire economy is totally fucked. And so like, I could see a pragmatic coalition between, you know, the social right and the economic left in the near future, just because of, you know, how bad things have gotten currently.
All right, thanks for that. And do you also see I guess the word would be, do you see like sorry, I'm having a hard time thinking of what I want to say here.
It's all good, man.
Do you see, basically, who do you think on the right? I know you mentioned Nick Fuentes, but who do you think on the right and who do you think on the left that's like prominent now will come together, or do you think that's something that's yet to kind of emerge?
Well, the funny part is Nick Fuentes was one of the few people that actually talked about like this kind of alliance between the economic left and like the social right, is because he just, you know, he basically started going on a speech like years ago about how, you know, socialists aren't the problem. It's really just like the neocons or whatever, right? You know, he's the first person on the far right that I heard, you know, basically say it's like, I don't really have a problem with socialists, but I do have a problem with like, you know, the people who are just basically like anti, like the values of this country, right? You know, he didn't have a problem like having a social democracy. So I see that like as an area of like compromise with some people.
All right. And one last thing, if you don't mind. Do you think that there's going to be some sort of like new version of politics, like, you know, how in the early 1900s, you know, we saw like the rise of like fascism and stuff like that? Do you think there's going to be some sort of new mode of kind of thinking about it?
I don't think it's necessarily new, is because the fact is, if you look at the politics of the silent generation and the greatest generation, like, you know, people that lived in similar circumstances as us, you know, engaged in the same politics as us. So it's like, I think it's not so much a new mode of politics, but a mode of politics that's complementary to the existing circumstances that we lived in and also they lived in as well. So like, once the boomer generation starts getting pushed out of power and they start getting sunsetted, you're going to see like politics really shift in the United States, probably closer to the early 20th century.
Okay, cool. That's all I got. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed the stream, and hope to see you around. The only way the only way the left and the right would work together is if they are invaded by a foreign country and they were trying to kill us. You know, the funny part is like, if you want to look at the Chinese Civil War, that's exactly what happened. Like, the communists and the nationalists literally worked together against like the Japanese invasion. So yeah, that does happen. It's not uncommon. Catholicism and Christianity in general is incompatible with the socialist society. See, the thing is, I don't think like religion or even like, you know, Catholicism is incompatible with really any society. It's like, you know, there was religion in the USSR, there was religion in the Soviet Union. I don't think it's something that's just going to really disappear, or even like, you know, going to disappear over time. Engaging in tailism. Yeah, you can accuse me of tailism. I couldn't really care less if you're going to say I'm engaging in tailism. I'm more or less of like, these are my interests, and if we have common interests, I'm willing to work with you, but please don't waste my time on trying to push me to one side of the aisle that I don't really feel like I am, because at the end of the day, it's like, I just want an affordable standard of living, right? So that's why I don't really care about the ideological purism crap. It's like, I'm willing to put aside certain differences for things that are much more concerning to me. Just like, you know, and this is kind of the funny thing, Dalai Lama, that you pointed out previously, is that like, I've been on the progressive left side of the aisle, right? And the thing is, one thing I've noticed with a lot of people on the progressive left, a tailism is basically the idea that when you follow people just because you are trying to vie for their approval. I'm not really vying for anybody's approval. I'm just the guy who gives my 2 cents on what I think is important to me and finding common interests with other people with the same thing. But the thing is that when it comes to engaging in tailism, right? You know, that would require me to actually be trying to pander to a group of people, and I'm really not. I'm just trying to find like common grounds with people who are in the same situation as me. Like, the average Gen Z person is not able to afford the average house, so of course I'm going to work with them, is because, you know, they have the same interest as me. So when forming a coalition, like an economic coalition, you know, that's what I'm going to do with them, is because at the end of the day, I want affordable housing. All these other politics is not really like a big, you know, priority for me. Now, here's the thing about the progressive left, is because originally when I went to the progressive left, right? Okay, so here's a bit of Alistair lore if you want to hear it, if you're interested, right? I started out as a right-wing libertarian, And then at the same time, I also watched house prices skyrocket in 2022. You know, you had bidding wars between private equity companies and boomers with a ton of liquidity, where they just went on a buying spree to buy every house that they possibly could get, right? Okay. And so I watched as the average house price skyrocketed while my income completely fell behind the cost of living crisis. And, you know, I believed at the time that, you know, if I reached out to the left, and, you know, I did, it's funny if you want to talk about tailism and stuff like that, I believed if I spoke to the progressive left side of the aisle that over time, they would care about economic issues. And this is one thing you're going to find about the progressive left and why you shouldn't fall too much into their side of the aisle, right? Is because at the end of the day, it's like, you know, a lot of them, when they talk about progressive politics, they care more about social progressive politics than they care about talking about economic politics. And so the thing is they don't ever try to form economic alliances with people who have different social views, is because a lot of people on the progressive left, not all, the reason they care more about progressive social politics is because, you know, for instance, Donald Trump getting elected, you know, the politics that come from his presidency affects them more at a more direct level than something that is economically based. And I found that more often than not is that most of the politics that they're concerned about of what directly affects them is the politics of social politics, not so much economic politics. And eventually, when I realized that as time went on, you can go on my shorts feed, I just simply stopped trying to, funny enough, pander even tail to these people and went my own way and started creating the content that you see on my channel now. Is because I got frustrated and I recognized that these people, you know, they care about the working class in a very superficial way. And so when somebody accuses me of being a tailist for the far right, I'm really not. It's just that it just so happens to be a lot of people on the younger generations are far right, and they're being affected by the same things that I'm going through myself. So of course, I'm going to try and form a coalition with them. So, absolutely frequently, I really don't like talking to progressive people, not really due to their actual politics, but their attitude about that. It's like they can't compromise. So if somebody's like a social conservative, they will never actually talk to somebody who might agree with them on economic politics because they have different like social views. And that's the problem with the progressive left, is that they will literally hang up any form of economic coalition based on social politics alone. And eventually I got frustrated and just walked away. And I don't even have a problem. I'm probably center-left socially. I don't really have a problem with the progressive left. But the thing is, at the end of the day, it's like, you know, they can't work with anybody. And that's a problem, is because it just so happens to be more important to me whether or not I have a roof over my head and I'm able to afford housing and groceries, as opposed to caring about trans people. No offense. That's just the way I see it. Crazy. No wonder the left was calling people Nazis. They already knew what was going to happen. Yeah, I said that for years ago. You know, even in my previous video when I talked about, like, you know, the Joker movie, when I was a right-wing libertarian, I pointed this out. This was a movie about class warfare, and they're calling it a far-right movie that's going to inspire incel violence. And it just made me scratch my head, like, the narrative that these people had kind of set up for themselves. Cultural conservatives are more open to communist thinking compared to progressives. And that's the disappointing part, Caesar Key, right? Is because the fact is that, like, you know, if I can talk to these people and form a base with them and actually make meaningful traction on getting the things that I care about done, I'm going to work with them. It's not an offense to the progressive left. It's just the fact is, it's like I can get a meaningful base with these people and get something I want done. It's just that simple. Bro went on a whole rant about the progressive left. My thoughts on them can be summed up with Lenin's leftism and is an infantile disorder. It's not anything new, Dalai Lama. So, I'm well aware of the progressive left. I've dealt with these people before. I'm just giving my experience on why I walked away from that side of the aisle and went my own way. That's just all there is to it. It's even worse. The progressive left try to frame the social problems will make things affordable. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the over-socialized midwittery that I criticize a lot, is because the fact is they can't have an honest discussion. They kind of try and lump in a bunch of stuff to say, like, you know, we got to oppose this, we got to bring this in. And it's like, you know, you need to address ideas on their own terms and what people actually believe and value. Otherwise, people are going to see it as disingenuous and completely ignore you, but they can't do that. You know, that's the problem with the progressive left. I had more productive conversations with fascists than progressives. Yeah, I know, it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Out of context, Alistair talking with Dalai Lama really sounds weird. It really does, in a sort of sense, but yeah. Not that I hate the progressive left, this is just, you know, my experience of dealing with the progressive left and why I talk the way I do and talk about the ideas and engage with the people that I do. Is because, in a sort of way, when you just push people out on social politics, you really can't form an economic, you know, base. Left and the right are the same, just different ideologies, the same damn bird to create the illusion. Yeah, my honest take, I'm just putting social politics to the side and just focusing on economic politics. That's just literally just of my politics. You know, if you go to my community post section, I literally go over it, is because, you know, back 20 years ago in the 2000s, the average person working a waiter job could afford the average apartment, an average one-bed apartment. And then 20 years later, when he's working as a lawyer, he can't afford the same place that he stayed at 20 years ago. So, yeah. I'm sorry, Your Holiness. I know you're okay, man. But no. I went to a TS STEM uni in the world, and I had to take classes on climate justice. Yeah, and that stuff's always, existing. It's not really common nowadays. The reason I'm not so anti-woke, and I don't really fall into the anti-SJW stuff, is because I think that's something that's, like, reminiscent of the 2010s. And just going anti-SJW just seems to be a waste of time these days. That was a cultural trend in the 2010s, and I just don't really care to, like, necessarily, go out of the way to make alignment with the woke, if you want to call it, or necessarily be anti-woke at the same time, right? And I just have a position of neutrality on it, is because there's more important politics to me, in my honest opinion, to engage in, as opposed to just focusing on social issues. Thoughts on Professor Zhang? Do you think he's a CCP agent? The funny thing about Professor Zhang, I'm going to give you like a hot take that I think is the opposite. I think he's American-controlled opposition. That's my hot take about Professor Zhang, is that like, because a lot of his talking points, where he basically kind of like bashes China, the most stereotypical like propagandist talking points, is one of the reasons why I don't, it's like, I disagree with the idea that he's like a CCP agent. It seems it's almost too much of a caricature to basically be like a CCP agent. I think he's a controlled opposition guy that's speaking more or less of what people think like the CCP is like. That's my hot take on that one. When speaking of the progressive left, we speak on focusing more on identity politics and class warfare. Yeah, that's it. Essentially that, they can do their identity politics. I don't have a beef with it, so I just kind of focused on class politics more or less. I think everyone had picked their side on the with woke, non-woke anyway, so no point in debating it. Yeah, exactly. I just don't have any interest in it. So yeah. He used to work with the State Department. I'm not surprised with Zhang, because the fact is I watched a couple of his articles, basically talking about China. I just kind of realized, like, wait a minute, this is more State Department talking points, so I think he's American-controlled opposition. I don't think he's a CCP agent. I think he's basically somebody that the American-controlled opposition would prop up to be, like, pretend to be CCP, a CCP agent. That's my take. Everyone's working with China. You know what? That's what I hate about the whole Fed discourse, right? Just calling everybody Feds, right? Is because at the end of the day, isn't it better just to engage with actual ideas and talk about what's important rather than trying to figure out who's saying what and constantly trying to identity gatekeep? That's such a waste of time, right? You're a Fed, I'm a Fed, whatever, right? This is why I say ideas are far more important to engage with as opposed to just like, pointing at stuff. Now, if you want to point out like how ideas can be a post hoc rationalization and a benefit to a particular side of the aisle, that's one thing, Serpentsa and China Uncensored, they've been predicting, China collapsing for a decade now at this point, and like they're still just being proven wrong day after day. It's like, if they want to be a propaganda mouthpiece, at the end of the day, they're free to do it, right? I'm not, the thing is, I consider it just to be a propaganda mouthpiece. At the end of the day, the truth exists independently of whatever somebody would like to believe. If China's a failing state internally, then it's going to collapse in time. But if they're not, then these people are just going to look like assholes after a couple of years. Fed accusations trending lately on who made a video. Yeah, it's not anything new. It's just the internet, man. I watched one of him where his ideas were mildly interesting, but watched another one where I saw how popular he was getting despite being the only one less than a year figured out. Yeah, there's AstroTurf plants. Not surprised. We're all Feds in our hearts. Exactly. That's kind of the funny part, is because I have like my own detractors and they like to say that all you guys are just like bots that I hired up through some like, streaming farm or some stupid shit. Even though like the majority of my content is quite literally just uploading videos, right? And the best response I usually get to that is like, all right guys, me and my bot farm are gonna go someplace else. You can do your own thing. We don't require validation. It's amazing that when you get called like a bot farm, that like you point out, it's like, do you not ever think that maybe people cannot just come together organically to have grievances about the current cost of living crisis in the United States, like whatsoever? That's just like an impossibility. That's why the Fed accusation stuff is just kind of retarded. I think it's something.
Talk about the woke shit. We gotta talk about the woke shit. Beat a fucking dead horse over and over.
Anything but class, bro. Anything but class. Nothing criticizing the billionaire class every single time. I think it's something that needs to be addressed. China, BRICS, Global South is growing. Yeah, that's an inevitability. And so the funny part is, like, you look at the ACP, and I'm not going to talk too much trash about the ACP, but the thing is, like, their entire shtick is multipolarism, right? The reason why I focus more on American class politics is because these are the interests that affect me the most. Like, being poor, getting poor in my own country, being made a perpetual renter in my own country affects me the most. Like, they took the shtick of focusing mostly on multipolarism, and they're totally, everybody's free to have their own politics. I'm not gonna like gatekeep or say people are not allowed to have like a certain set of politics, but the reason I don't really go too crazy in the multipolarism stuff is because I see multipolarism as an inevitability regardless of whether or not somebody wants to believe it or not, right? I've already given my evidence on why I consider the United States to be kind of like a dying empire, a failing state in a sort of sense. You know, and the thing is, if these things aren't addressed, yeah, the United States is going to continue to fall behind. There's nothing anybody can do about that, right? So that's why I say, when I say, you know, multipolarism is an inevitability, it doesn't need any proving. I'm not going to start a propaganda farm to prove that, like, China is the future. That's just not my shtick, right? You know, I'm going to give my 2 cents. I'm going to quietly tell you the truth, and you're free to believe it or not, right? Which is why it's like, you know, I don't really go full into the multipolarism stuff, is because it's a waste of time, which is why I focus more on class politics that affects me as an ordinary American citizen. I'm a bot made by Alistair. Hail, Comrade Alistair. Hail, Chairman Alistair, or something like that, right? I love your streams, Moss. So you're down to earth while seeing the truth in your goat green hat. Yeah, absolutely. One guy asked me if I was going to open up a Luigi hat merch thing, and I'd probably get sued by Nintendo, but that would be funny if it went viral. Okay, ACP is actually tailless, but I will work with them in my area since there aren't too many options in Texas. You know, that's my take. It's like, if you want to join the ACP, join the ACP, man. You know, joining a party is better than no party at all. I'm not going to get mad at anybody who joins the DSA or the ACP, is because getting organized in an organization that is pro-working class is better than doing nothing at all, right? I would like to start my party in the future, start my own party, an American Workers' Party, but at the end of the day, I'm in no position to do that, so I tell people, it's like, just join another party and, you know, see what other parties exist, because, you know, being useful in some capacity is better than doing nothing at all, right? So, that's my 2 cents on that one. You know, join a party, help people out, you know, be a part of your local community and try and do things that actually benefit the working class. That's my take. Negative 10 million on social credits. We're all glowies, we just don't know it yet. Flipped assets. I mean, the world used to be multipolar until World War I, and the old world order was temporary shifted is because we were the one country that wasn't directed by World War twice. Yeah, no, the funny part is in the 19th century, it was the British Empire that was the empire where the sun never set. And then after World War II, that transitioned to the American Republic, which is the American Empire. And, you know, of course, you had multipolarism with the Cold War with the Soviet Union. But, you know, the United States had the Pax Americana literally 75 years ago, but the thing is the center of the world changes. And, you know, my bet is obviously China's, because I'm looking at their technological developments, what they're doing for their civilization, and I'm impressed by what they're doing. That's not me trying to shill for China, because obviously I would like to have this advancements done in my own country to make my standard of living better, but of course, you know, unfortunately, we don't have the political will to do that, right? But, you know, the center of the world changes, you know, every century, every decade, or not even every decade, but every century or so on, stuff like that, right? You know, it goes anywhere. It changes, you know, where it is, the center of the world. Like, you know, you had the golden age of Islam, you know, in the Middle East, right? You know, that was the center of the world for a period of time, you know, and I honestly prefer that. If you look at, like, you know, British colonialism or European colonialism, right? You know, why Europe and North America are the center of the world was probably because of colonialism and the invention of the steam engine, right? That is a 500 period of human history, 500-year period of human history that is not permanent. And prior to European colonialism, prior to Christopher Columbus exploring the New World, you know, this was not the norm. In fact, you can look at the trade routes through the Silk Road where, you know, European countries actually did trade fairly equally with India and China, you know, traded silver and gold. You know, so the thing is the center of the world changes. And really, the only reason Europeans engaged in colonialism was because the Ottoman Empire made it, you know, started putting in heavy taxes along the Silk Road, right? So the thing is, the center world always changes at the end of the day. And that's why I don't go out of my way to say, oh, multipolarism is inevitable. I need to set up a whole propaganda farm to say China is the future. I don't really care about doing that, because my interests lie as an American worker with my own country. So every president should be able to understand throughput and be able to min-max transport tycoons and Factorio. You know, that's the way you need to take it when building high-speed rails. China is a nice country. I've heard a lot of good things about them and their dog walking or manufacturing. Yeah, dude, the funny part is like, you know, the ruling class like 5 years ago was going on this whole narrative that China was going to essentially become a service economy like us. And, you know, they were going to get rid of their manufacturing, offshore it somewhere else. They were kind of projecting what we did to ourselves by offshoring our manufacturing and industry to China and saying China would do the eventual same thing, you know, everywhere else. Except they didn't. They just automated their factories. They kept their manufacturing and industry, and then they built an impressive tech and engineering base on top of that because they have all the supply chains to do, you know, experimental tech as much as they'd like, right? It's impressive, like, how much the Western powers just project themselves on everybody else, and then, you know, it just goes out differently. It is incredibly impressive, like, how stupid it is. What would you think of far leftists infiltrating the Democrat Party, how Lenin suggested the Chinese communists do? You know, I'm going to be honest with you. Good luck trying to, like, infiltrate the Democratic Party. You know, the whole AOC squad thing has been a meme for over a decade at this point. I think the Democrat Party is hopeless. You know, my thing with the Democrat Party is that they act as like a filter and a barrier to what's acceptable for the ruling class to allow in American politics, right? You know, they'll basically do the Democratic gaslight of where, you know, whatever politics, it could be like Medicare for all, it could be actually popular with everybody in the country, but then they will claim that it's not popular politics and they would never actually sell, and that is the filter point for any politics that we want here, you know, in this chat to be implemented in the United States, and they'll find a way to filter it in the name of the so-called majority, right? And so they essentially just filter out any politics that offends the sensibilities of the ruling class. So that's why I don't support the Democratic Party. Now, if there's an exceptional Democratic Party candidate that is able to toe the politics that I care about, okay, sure, I'll you know, support him. But the thing is, I don't hold high expectations. So I don't agree with the whole infiltrating the Democratic Party. They're very well aware of that, and the entire Uniparty is designed to filter out politics that offends the sensibilities of the ruling class. Billionaires might be fake and not even exist. They're probably just government actors with public-private ownership. That's an interesting hypothesis I've never really thought about before. Yeah, AOC comes out and says she supports Israel. Yeah, see, that's my point, right? You know, I still remember with Jimmy Dore and Force the Vote, and they completely cucked out, you know, AOC completely cucked out is because she didn't want to offend the sensibilities of Mama Bear. And that's the great uniparty filter that I'm talking about, right? You might as well just go with the third party. They're going to accuse you of throwing your vote away, but if you're actually engaging in class politics and advancing the political power of the working class, who gives a shit what these midwits think, okay? You know, they're going to do their own thing. They're going to get mad is because they're going to say that you're throwing your vote away, but then their entire existence is to filter any politics that you care about to passively support their garbage. So yeah, I just ignore the Democratic Party most of the time. To adjust to this new reality is really going to be hard for Americans to cope with. That's the tough part. In my older videos, I said that if Trump tried to beat the world with a stick, and this is what I said in my last video recently too, is because I'm just recycling the points I've talked about over a year and a half now, is that if Trump tried to play power politics with the world, and I said this back in early 2025, it would not go the way he thought it would be, and it would essentially antagonize the rest of the world, and it would essentially lead to the consequence where, you know, we would effectively become American isolationists. At the same time, while we've already offshored our manufacturing industry and also are offshoring our tech and engineering. And that's going to be the tough one, is because if you have no industry, you have no manufacturing, you don't make anything, you've already offshored your tech and engineering, you know, you have nothing, that if people just, you know, blockaded your country, you're essentially going to become a third world country overnight. That's the brutal thing that Americans are going to go through. And that's why I tried to basically wake people up slowly one by one by pointing out this obvious fact, is that if you don't get a little bit wiser with politics, you know, the United States is going to go down a path which I don't think most people, especially in the United States, including myself, don't want to go through, where if the worst outcome is not being invaded and occupied by another country, but becoming economically irrelevant, where we have no manufacturing industry or even tech or engineering to actually build things, and we essentially just become a third world country overnight. Irrelevancy is the worst thing that could happen to the United States, and Trump is barreling us down that path. It's actually kind of impressive. Most far leftists in the U.S. aren't competent, sadly. Oh, I agree. That's the reason I walked away for a lot of the far leftists and started going my own way. You aren't going to find many STEM grad geniuses in the U.S. far left. So very little. Well, it's not only that you won't find very many STEM geniuses on the far left. It's the fact is because, you know, they kind of, a lot of people, this is one thing I don't like about the far left, cultural-wise, okay? Because, like, here's the problem. There's two sides of the political right and the political left. The political right, if you've ever noticed it with all the self-improvement stuff, is that, you know, most of the solutions that are prescribed, even with the Andrew Tate types, right, if you want to go down that route, is the advice that they prescribe to their own audiences is usually along the lines of, like, self-improvement nonsense, right? You know, I call it cope improvement, right? They individualize everything. You know, any kind of problem that you talk about is not a societal issue, it's an individual issue, and you just got to skill yourself up enough, and, you know, that will solve whatever issue you're having at any given moment, right? Now, the left is the exact opposite of this way, the political left, and this is not any particular left, but the political left, is that instead of everything being an individual problem like the right does, where you have to just, you know, improve yourself enough, you need to work out, grow muscle, become stronger, become smarter, whatever, right? The left instead takes the opposite approach, where any problem that anybody is facing is automatically a societal problem, and so they pathologize in a sort of way where, like, you know, they could be a pot-smoking, like, dreg or something like that, right? You know, they could just be somebody who just, you know, is, like, not orderly with their life or whatever, right? And they will blame society for their problems. They'll do the opposite of the right. Instead of, you know, individualizing everything, they'll collectivize everything. You know, every issue in their life becomes a collective issue rather than just a recognition that, you know, to some degree, they have to make themselves a better person at the end of the day. And so the nature of, like, you know, this politics is that, like, you know, because of this fact, right, you know, when you try to basically work with leftists, okay, you by circumstance, by coincidence, attract people who want to deflect all problems that they have with their lives onto the group, onto society. And those people are probably the most insufferable people you'll ever meet, is because they try to make everything a societal problem, with them recognizing, like, they'll turn, like, drug abuse or something like that they've gone into themselves as like a societal problem rather than something that, you know, has to be done from the individual, right? And so what happens is you create this kind of amorphous mass of people who want to do something, but they never do. So that's the thing about the far left in the United States. That's the problem with the far left, or anybody that's typically on the left, is you inevitably attract these types. And, you know, I've more or less tried to make sure that I don't attract these types, is because the fact is that, like, when you have a group of people who are just degenerates and they don't actually have, like, some semblance of stability in their life, you know, you can't really politically do anything, can you? Okay? If people are always high on drugs and they're, you know, just living terrible lives, it's like, you know, you can't really form a political party off of these people. They're not going to do anything. You know, they're easily conquerable. And that's the problem with that section of the left, is that, like, when you try to form, you know, politics based on economic politics or trying to fix things societally wise, you're going to attract these people, you know, de facto, and you need to filter them out. I think Marx called them lumpens. Lumpen proletariat is because the fact is, you know, they're just the dregs of society that are always, like, you know, trying to basically make their problems like everybody's problems. Socially conservatism will rebel against economic liberalism. It kind of already is, and I think Nick Fuentes kind of really started that, is because the fact is he made the astute point, especially now that the young right cannot afford to settle down and have normal families and have a decent standard of living, is like, you know, they're going to be forced to rebel against economic liberalism. Just hand out more needles, bro, the left. Yeah, make civilization worse and, like, get everybody high up on drugs. That sounds like a recipe for a healthy civilization. Not gonna lie, I used to do that slightly. I had to do a lot of straightening out. Yeah, it's very important, is because the fact is you'll find more often than not, the people who try to like socialize or collectivize all their problems, you know, like, it's not an insult to these people, but you'll find that the group is not able to actually fix your problem, whatever that is. And it's like, it's not an assault to anybody's character, but the thing is you can't, there are certain things in your life that you have to fix on your own, and that's just the way it is. Change comes from the individual. And then the group, as a bunch of individuals that have decided to change society, that is how you bring about collective change. You know, a lot of people who are over-socialized expect the group to do things on their behalf. Change comes from the individual. You know, that's a fact of life. It took 6 years for the government to admit that it was a lav leak. The social order must be completely purged for the establishment of the new socialist economic system. You know, I actually do want to make my next video, hopefully, if I can actually do it, is because I'm going to use AI to generate, like, a lot of the Manim files, or the Manim. So anybody heard of Manim? It's basically an API that 3 Blue 1 Brown uses for his math videos. And I kind of want to use that library, that Python library, to generate, like, economic planning math so I can make it easily accessible for everybody in the chat. Because I do want to talk about economic planning again. I do want to make a video on economic planning, you know, mostly borrowing ideas from Paul Cockshott, is talking about, like, how easy it is to actually do economic planning, and then maybe upload some, like, you know, algorithms using C++, because you don't need a whole ton of compute to invert these matrices to calculate, like, you know, production values, right? You know, once you invert these matrices, it's pretty easy to actually produce things and just kind of schedule production through a planned economy. It's so much easier nowadays. And that's kind of the funny part, is because the Soviet Union, if you want to talk about, you know, what happens when you have an overly collectivist society, I'm going to go on a bit of a spiel about Gosplan, because Gosplan was the central planning agency of the Soviet Union. You know, SOSEC is China's modern state asset management, you know, planning system for the People's Republic of China. But in the USSR, it was Gosplan, and it employed about 1.3 million people at its height, okay? And the problem is, when you live in a pro-labor country that's all about being pro-working class, and your, you know, national symbol is like the hammer and sickle to represent the strength of the working class, right? And you come up and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, exactly, matrices. Hell yeah, dude. You know, you're basically not diagonalizing. You're pulling out the eigenvalues of the matrices. I got that little reference right there. But the thing is, when you have an entire bureaucracy of 1.3 million people employed, and you were to walk up to them and you were to say, you know what, I invented this new way using Leontief matrices and linear programming to plan the economy, and it's going to put a bunch of people out of jobs, but it's going to make everything much more efficient. How well do you think that's going to sell to a group of 1.3 million people who are employed by the state, that this thing is going to take all your jobs and, you know, in a pro-labor society? It's going to be kind of hard to sell, right? And so, you know, the bureaucracy can be a pain in the butt on actually making meaningful changes, because the fact is, how do you tell 1.3 million people that this is good for civilization, but, you know, we'll be able to put you in another role to actually, you know, it will make your life better, right? And that's the reason why the Soviet Union didn't really adopt central planning or computerized planning, is because at the height of Gosplan, it employed a total of 1.3 million people, and it's kind of hard to displace 1.3 million people through automation in a supposedly pro-labor country, right? Don't use AI for that. Far too likely to make mistakes. Well, the funny part about that Metal King is, like, if I'm using AI to basically convert math equations into Manim, like Python code, you know, that's easily verifiable, is because the rendered output of that code is going to be easily verifiable when it renders that video, and I use that video in, you know, my uploads, right? So it's not too terribly bad. See, verifiability on the output, is how you can basically get AI to work for you. Because if I give it an equation, I say, I want you to, make this equation transform into that equation, or I want you to put this graph here, right? That's not too terribly hard. It's very easy to get the AI to do something that's clearly defined and is able to complete it for yourself. We create a system that can stand on its own while the elite rots on its own. Yeah, unironically, that's one of the things that right-wing coalition made a very interesting point, is because the fact is, it's why is our elite so unimpressive? Is because at the end of the day, these people have traded, actual competence and skill for the symbolism of skill and holding the institutions that represent skill. And so the thing is, the people who actually do have the skills, the counter-elite, can literally just go their own way and form their own counter-society. And that's probably what's going to happen. That's how every revolution happens. It's how people like Napoleon Bonaparte pop up, where, they get passed up by the existing regime and they join the revolutionary side. Do you plan on discussing how labor time accounting can be applied to central economic planning? Yeah, actually, I've got several articles on that. And so, yeah, that's something I love talking about. You want to talk about logistics and planning. So the fun part about economic planning and using input-output matrices to plan production, through production cycles, is that's fairly, once you get past that, it's when it comes to logistics and Dijkstra's algorithms and all these sorts of things and how you actually transport things, standard logistics is already a very mature field. Amazon, as a company, has already perfected logistics and transportation to a large degree, right? So that's already established, right? And bringing that in combination with, economic planning using input-output matrices would essentially make a pretty good planned economy. That's my hot take. Talking about economic planning, right before the daily wage tomorrow. I got to give everybody a sliver of hope before the daily wage begins tomorrow. Is because the fact is I can't be doom-pilling everybody, right? There has to be a possibility for a better future. Because we can talk about wage rage all we want, but at the end of the day, we have to present a better future and a better opportunity for a better tomorrow, as opposed to just being doom and gloomers. Which I'm glad we're having this conversation in this stream. So yeah, what are your thoughts on generative AI? I don't have a problem with generative AI. It just exists. It's not my favorite aspect of it. AI is being used for what it should be used for. Shocker. Mathematics and medicine are great uses for AI rather than pure slop. That's what I love about it. It's really nice at manipulating mathematical equations without having to make the amateur errors of a minus sign. That's what I do appreciate AI, is because then you can prompt it in what way you want to basically do math. I read economic planning books like Towards New Socialism and The People's Republic. I had so much fun. Yeah, I love those books. People's Republic of Walmart kind of proves that, they don't... See, the funny part about Cybersyn is that it was a rather immature experiment on how they were going to plan an economy before they got overthrown and cooed. But the thing is, Towards New Socialism actually does give, a good idea of how to use, input-output matrices to plan things. And the People's Republic of Walmart just kind of hammers home and illustrates, how planned, a lot of these large mega companies really are. I don't really have, many other things other than talking about particular algorithms, such as, linear programming. LLMs are not trustworthy. Yeah, that's true. But neither was the search engine, and people were complaining about the search engine 20 years ago when it first was coming out, 30 years ago. So, with that being said, I have enjoyed your guys' company for this stream, right before we begin the work week, because, everyone knows that the work week's right around the corner. I don't want to keep you... What's up, Justin Gaines? Yeah, a little bit late, but that's okay. I'm going to be trying, do this more regularly, and if people enjoy it. But yeah, no, it seems like people are still showing up and people are enjoying it, but I've enjoyed your company here. But we've been streaming for about 2 hours, and I know it's getting a little bit late, and I definitely need to head to bed myself. But I've enjoyed your company here. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video or stream, right? But yeah, if you feel like donating to the channel, I started to buy me a coffee. I'm not going to monetize the channel because I don't like advertisements on my videos, and I don't like Google. But if you do feel like throwing me a couple of bucks here and there, just go to the link tree and, throw a couple of dollars if you want to help out, send some money to the channel. So with that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and hopefully you have a tolerable work week, and it's not too terribly bad dealing with obnoxious employers. Let's get some green hats in the chat to close it off. How about we do that? Let's get some green hats. Let's get that chat filled with some green hats. Because let's get some wage rage going on in the chat.
Right on, man. Right on. Hope you have a good work week, man.
You too, guys. I appreciate your guys' company. You guys take it easy.